And we're ready to go.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us at the February 22nd, 2021 Auburn City Council meeting. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Amy, would you mind calling the roll, please?
Sure. Councilmember Berlant.
I'm here.
Amara.
Present.
Dowden Calvillo.
Present.
Riddell Harris.
Here.
And Mayor Spokely.
Here. Thank you very much. If everybody could please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everybody. And Daniel, as always, thank you for having the flag in the background. Appreciate that very much. We'll move on to our next item, which is agenda approval. This is time set aside for council members and members of the public to ask for removal, postponement, or change in the listed sequence of agenda items. The agenda will be approved by a roll call vote of the council. Do any council members have any adjustments to our proposed agenda tonight? Amy, any members from the public have any comments on our agenda sequence tonight?
I did not receive any.
All right. Do you want to do a roll call for us?
Sure. I'll take a motion to approve.
I'll move approval. Move
second it.
approval.
A motion would help to start the process. Perfect. Thank you, Amy.
Yeah, no problem. And so Councilmember Berlant.
Aye.
Amara.
Yes.
Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Riddell Harris.
Aye.
And Mayor Spokely.
Yes. So Amy, I'm gonna ask a quick question as the very competent clerk that you are. Are we required on all matters, even matters like the consent calendar, to do a roll call vote based on our virtual environment? Because I've been in meetings where they're not doing it.
Right. So we didn't used to do a roll call vote on agenda approval, but because it's a virtual meeting, all votes of the city council should be by roll call.
Yeah.
It is. I do find it interesting because I've been in many meetings where we've done virtual. Obviously, everything's virtual now, but I've been in many meetings where they haven't done that. So it's interesting. I'm glad you're keeping us on the straight and narrow. I appreciate that. Next item.
I will additionally thank the city attorney's office.
Thank you, Amy. Next item on the calendar or on the agenda is our consent calendar. All matters listed on the consent calendar are considered to be routine in nature and will be approved by one blanket motion with a roll call vote. There will be no separate discussions on these items unless persons request specific items to be removed from the consent calendar for discussion and separate action. Any items removed will be considered after the motion to approve the consent calendar. As I think I missed at our last council meeting, I'm going to ask the city manager to just do a quick brief rundown of the consent calendar for us and the folks who are in attendance virtually here.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, just a couple of items tonight. Item one is the appointment of some economic development commissioners. Two new ones, Christine Ubink, who is representing the Old Town Business Association, Reese Browning, who is a new member, and the return of EDC member Mike Carson. Item two is the appointment of Historic Design Review Commissioner. Is the reappointment of Jennifer Costa, who is currently on the HDRC. Item three are warrants from April of 2020 through January of this year. And item number four is the approval of an agreement with the executive search firm Peckham McKinney to help the city in the search for a new administrative services director. And that is the consent calendar.
Thank you very much, Sean. Appreciate that very much. Do we have any comments, motions, removals from the council?
Mr. Mayor, I don't want to remove the item from the agenda, item number 3, which is the approval of the warrants. I would just like to take this opportunity to request that we have warrants on our agenda for approval once a month, just going forward, as opposed to every 6 months or once a year, because it does make it tough to review all that data. So I just would, if we can do that without me taking the item off consent, then I'd like to make that request.
The city manager and I talked about that at our briefing this morning. So yes, that will be a more regular occurrence for us moving forward.
Great. With that said, then I would move approval of the consent calendar, Mr. Mayor.
I'll second it.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Amy, do we have any public comment on the consent calendar?
We do not.
Okay, no public comment. So we do have a motion on the floor. Amy, would you please, any discussion? Hearing none. Amy, you can't want to say something? No? Amy, if you would mind calling roll, please.
Councilmember Berlant. Amara.
Yes.
Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Riddell Harris.
Aye.
And Mayor Spokely.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Your cat's still watching, Amy.
No.
All right, let's move on to public comment. This is a time provided that the public may speak to the council on items that are not on this agenda. Please make your comments as brief as possible. The council cannot act on the items not indicated on this agenda. However, these items will be automatically referred to staff. Please speak. Skip that. Council members shall have the option to speak for 30 seconds on any items not on the agenda at this time. Do we have any council comments at this time? All right, hearing none. Oh,
I was just going to
Alice?
say, I was trying to get the name of I just wanted to mention that it was very much heavy on my heart that we did have a significant fire in Newcastle. I know that the Auburn Fire Department participated, and it was a devastating fire that destroyed the Enchanted Forest Exotic Animal Sanctuary in Newcastle. I was trying to grab the name. It was a barn fire, and all 40 of the animals that were in the barn perished. So just very, very heavy on my heart to that sanctuary. Thank you to the Auburn Fire Department. I hear it was just a terrible fire, very hot and fast. But just wanted to make note of that my deepest sympathies go to the sanctuary and hope that they can get up and running. And what a devastating loss.
thank you, Councilwoman Dowden Calvillo. Councilman Berlant.
Yeah, I'll just take that solemn note and just make a positive piece of it. Take an opportunity and introduce our last meeting. But here is little Jackson Douglas Berlant. We've stopped dinner time, so he might be a little fussy, but appreciate everybody's kind words. And I thought, what could make a city council meeting more exciting than a 2.5-week-old?
That is very awesome. Congratulations to you and your beautiful wife. That's awesome, Daniel. Thank you very much.
And I'll say I got to see him on Saturday, and he's even cuter in person.
Zoom doesn't do him justice. Anyways, thank you.
Rachel?
I just wanted to say a big thank you and congratulations to all of the kids and teachers and administrators who all worked hard to get AUSD students back to 5 days a week starting this week. I know it was a lot of work on everyone's part to make sure that they were meeting all the safety guidelines in order to do that. And the kids are ecstatic to be back and getting to see their friends. And so I know it was a lot of work on the board's part and everyone involved. So I just really appreciate that. And we're all really excited.
Thank you very much for that, Councilwoman Riddell Harris. Councilwoman Amara.
Well, I might as well add a personal note. I've become the grandparent of my 6th grandchild, a boy, and he was born 3 days ago, and a healthy young man. So his name is Wolf Crute. And anyway, so I'm very excited. Daniel and I are at different ends of the spectrum, but it's still exciting.
I think both the babies that we heard about tonight have fantastic names. So congratulations to all.
Oh, one more quick thing. Oh,
yes.
Thank you. I know that I want to say thank you again to the firefighters because I know there was another fire at the DeWitt complex on the same night, and they had to go to 2 structure fires. So they're working extra hard even in the off season. So appreciation to them.
Yeah, thank you very much. As always, we certainly appreciate all of their heroic efforts. Let's go ahead and move on to our first council item, which is the fiscal year 2020-2021 mid-year financial status report. And I believe we have Mr. Heath that's going to make this presentation.
He is on his way into the meeting.
Okay. Good evening, Mr. Heath.
I think I'm on. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes. Good to see you, Andy.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. For the record, Andy Heath, the city's finance director. What I'd like to do for you tonight is just give you a status of where the budget lies through about the first 7 months of the fiscal year, fiscal 2021. Give you an update on some of the major funds and kind of walk through some of the things that we're seeing. And at the end of the presentation, kind of queue up exactly what the next year's budget, 21-22 budget, how it's unfolding and some of the things that we need to really look forward to as part of that budget. I think Amy has a presentation that will be shared. So
hey Andy, real quick, just a note to my fellow council members before we get too far into this or before we start this. At the end, we've got some of the workshops that we talked about doing. We don't necessarily need to do it during this item, but I want to try to get those on the calendar as soon as possible, just so we can make sure that we get it out to the community for maximum, public participation. So if your calendar's handy, get it ready, because at the end of this item, Andy kind of talks about the workshops to be determined. I want to make sure that we at least talk about some target dates so we can get them again out into the community.
Okay, great. Yep. All right. So moving on to the next slide, discusses the outline. So what I'll do tonight is I'll give you an overview of the mid-year budget review process, some of the things that we did with staff and internally to look at where we are for the first part of the year. Then we'll go over the general fund, both revenues and expenditures, and then dive into the financial forecast, which has been updated with a lot of changes that have been built in for the next 6 or 7 years or so. We'll look at the 2 enterprise funds of the city, the airport and the sewer fund, a few other special revenue funds that I selected based on some of the things that I think the council needs to know as far as mid-year is concerned. And then we'll look at 21-22 budget development and some of the things that are in the queue right now. Next slide. So part of the mid-year budget review process was actually looking at the fiscal 19-20 data that for the year just finished. So that audit has been completed. That audit will be coming to the council probably in the next meeting or two for review. Essentially fiscal 19-20 is done, but more importantly, what fiscal 19-20 did was it allowed us to know exactly what fund balance carryovers were going to be coming into this year's budget. So all the schedules that you have in the mid-year budget update actually do include the actual fund balance carryovers from fiscal 19-20 leading into fiscal 2021. Where necessary, we met with departments as required to obtain the updated baseline budget information for fiscal 2021 and actually worked with them, worked closely with the police chief on certain things to make sure that we had all of the staffing and everything in order in his department, as it is the biggest department in the city. And also worked closely with Chris Chardella and Mengeldine on the capital activity to make sure that we were accounting for the capital correctly. Review revenue trends and forecasts. So as you know, sales tax is the biggest mover right now. It's the most volatile revenue source given the impacts that COVID has had on not only the economy, but fuel. Everything's been all over the place. So we work closely with HDL, our sales tax consultant, to really try to understand exactly where we think things might be going in the future for the current year and more importantly for the years to come. So work closely with them and then looked at different trends in-house to see exactly where we thought that things might end up for this year. And then one thing that I do want to mention is that we consider continued updates to the 2021 budget as the 21-22 budget process unfolds. As you know, we have a very robust budget calendar ahead of us with a lot of things on tap on a lot of different dates. So what I'll be doing more than likely is specifically for the general fund and maybe some other funds where necessary, is giving you an update on where things are so far as this current fiscal year unfolds for the balance of the next 5 months or so. So look forward to that because we can rest assured that there will be pandemic impacts and maybe coming out of what the impacts are right now as things move forward. Next slide, please. So jump right into the general fund. So this is your general fund for fiscal 2021. You can see you had a budget that originally, or the amended budget that we brought back to the council a few months ago, had 13.1 million in revenue, offset by just over 13 million in expenditures. We anticipated a surplus of just about $40,000 or less. Okay. The estimated amounts that we're looking at for, as of right now, are 13.6 million in revenue, so about $500,000 more in revenue coming in, and 13.5 million in expenditures, just under 500,000 in additional expenditures, for an anticipated surplus of about $82,209. So a little bit better there on the surplus side. Next slide, please. Going into what makes up some of the changes that I mentioned on both the revenue and the expenditure side. So we have an increase in revenue in the general fund of just over $500,000. And that's made up of several things that include a true up of the property taxes in lieu of the motor vehicle license fee. And this is just based on what we receive from the county twice a year. So this will happen. There's another $4,000 that will come in from that. Sales taxes, we're adjusting upwards by about $75,000. This may come in a little bit higher, but I want to stay on the conservative side because I want to watch exactly what happens with the price of fuel and fuel as demand increases as the pandemic wanes, hopefully wanes. As we know, the price of a barrel of oil has gone up to $60 as of late. And that's up about 50% from what it was at least a couple of months ago. So that is having an impact on the price of fuel, which ultimately leads to more sales taxes being collected as every gallon of fuel is sold. So $75,000 in additional sales taxes, mainly because of that increase in fuel. Over the long haul, as you'll see in the forecast, I do have sales tax coming back and in robust terms over the next couple of years. And by 22-23, the end of fiscal 22-23, as you'll see in the forecast slide, a few slides from now, you'll see that the sales tax is definitely adding to that bottom line. So sales tax is coming back. The pandemic didn't have an impact the way that we thought it would, and that continues to this day. Transient occupancy tax, however, I have not seen the recovery in transient occupancy tax in the city of Auburn yet, reducing that budget by about $50,000. The city's largest transient occupancy taxpayer, the Holiday Inn, has not had the returns that it's had in the past. And unfortunately, at this point in time, at least for the next 5 months, I want to lower that budget just to be on the conservative side. Hopefully, as spring happens and as we get into summer, we'll see the tourist return and the use of that hotel go up, so that revenue can come in higher than what it is. But based on what we've collected to date, have to lower that budget by about $50,000. Real property transfer tax is screaming right now. There are a lot of homes that are changing hands in the city of Auburn. In fact, that $60,000 will probably be a little bit more because after this presentation was prepared, we did receive another $9,000 in real property transfer tax for the month of January. So that is doing very, very well right now. So $60,000 increase there. Business licenses down about $10,000, and this may be just because of the one-time business licenses that might not be happening, where there's certain business that comes into town on a one-time basis, and people come in to pay their business licenses and might not be or just aren't in business at this point. So not a big change there, but again, to be conservative in the revenue forecast, reduction of $10,000 there. Tobacco retailer fee, small increase of $3,500. Building permits, increase of $30,000 there. Building and planning both are experiencing significant increases compared to what was originally budgeted. There's a lot of activity that's going on right now. And in fact, in the couple of days after this presentation was prepared, both building and planning fees came in between $10,000 and $15,000 over a couple day period. So seeing a lot of activity on both building and planning. You'll see that when I talk about the planning in just a minute. Traffic fines and civil fines. This one is all over the map. And this one is hard to really peg. You may recall a couple of years ago, we saw a significant spike in the amount of traffic fines and civil fines that we were receiving and being allocated from the county, where they went up tens of thousands of dollars from one period to another. Right now, they're going down, and the amount that we're receiving may have something to do with the fact that perhaps there aren't as many traffic fines or civil fines that are being doled out by agencies across the county, or some other reason. This may require a little bit more research, but I do have to lower that budget by about $100,000, where we would receive typically about $200,000. I only think we're going to receive about $100,000 this year. So we'll look into that a little bit more. Administrative citations increase of just under 8,000, and that's based on experience to date. Next slide, please. For the Proposition 172, this is the public safety sales tax that goes to the police and fire departments, increase of about 31,000 based on the forecast from HDL. Law enforcement and fire grants, increase of 85,000 there for a couple of grants that have been received for public safety. COVID-19 and CARES Act funding, all of the amount that was split over 2 years is actually now budgeted in the current fiscal year, mainly because of an accounting issue that needed to be followed. So when we went through the audit, we looked at guidance that was coming down from the groups that give guidance, and GASB and whoever, and they indicated that all of this CARES Act money should be accounted for in the current fiscal year and not split over certain fiscal years, even though those expenditures were over a couple of fiscal years. So we moved all that budget into the current year, and that's what that is. That's why that's accounted for there. We also have $200,000 being added on the revenue side for SB2 and LEAP planning grants that will be used for, I believe, the housing element, and also for the ADU program that the city is looking into. So that money is added on both sides of the budget. So you'll see that in the community development department as a $200,000 add on the appropriation side as well. So that they will move interchangeably. Engineering costs recovered, again, development, a lot going on with development, $20,000 increase there. Plan check fees, as I mentioned, $25,000 increase there. Fingerprint processing fees, reduction of about $5,500, and that's just because the live scan machine at the police department wasn't being used during the COVID environment. And then we have other miscellaneous revenues, about $17,950. These are basically reimbursements and surplus property sales, those sorts of things. And then when you combine all the other things that I didn't mention specifically, it's about another $8,000 added to the general fund budget. So that is the revenue side. Now we'll quickly go through the expenditure side of the budget, where in the general fund, we're recommending an increase in appropriations of just under $470,000. For the city council, a reduction of about $6,000, and that's just based on updated salary and benefit costs and getting that right from the beginning of the year. The police department, a reduction of about $10,857 there, again, lower benefits costs. And then we also have the addition of the police station and CAD upgrade costs for the small amount of capital that's been incurred. So total reduction to the police department of just under $11,000 there. Fire department increase in that budget of about $239,000. We have a high amount of overtime going on in the fire department, specifically because of the strike teams, most of which is being reimbursed. And then more importantly, workers' comp claims. So there are a significant amount of workers' comp claims in the fire department right now. And with those vacancies, you have a high amount of overtime to maintain minimum levels of staffing on each shift. So that's what's going on there. Then we also have an addition of some grant funded costs where there's a couple of grants out there for SSV EMS, TMG grant, and a Middle Fork grant as well. So that is the increase in appropriations there. And a couple of those grants are actually the public safety grants that I'm increasing on the revenue side. So that's the offset there. Next slide, please. In community development, as I mentioned, for the increase in their revenue due to grants for $200,000, we're actually recommending an increase in expenditures of $231,000, and that is because we're adding that the LEAP and the SB2 grant amounts to contractual services. So those will go hand in hand. And then we also have some grant funded costs for the grant funded costs for the housing element. GIS, I missed that one, and the ADU program. In building inspection, reduction of just under $7,000 there. Again, lower benefits costs for the balance of the year, and then lower materials and supplies costs based on experience to date. So felt appropriate to reduce that budget by a little bit based on what's been spent so far this year. In information technology, an increase of about $15,000 due to the recabling of the police department, which was charged to the information technology budget. Next slide, please. And public works. So public works reduction of just under $90,000 there, and that is based on the salary savings incurred year to date for the public works director position. And for a maintenance worker position. So what's going on there is whatever has been saved so far to date is built into that $87,000 number. But keep in mind that when we put the budget together for the balance of the year, and more importantly for the base budget model that you'll see, I'm assuming all those positions that are currently vacant are filled for the balance of the year. So to the extent certain positions remain vacant for the rest of this fiscal year, that $87,000 number will become more of a savings over time. In the city manager's office, an increase of just over $13,000, and that's based on personnel costs for the new city manager and a need to increase that budget. Support for community projects, a reduction of about $12,000 there, and that is actually, that's not the right term there. That is actually due to the double counting of the library in the current fiscal year at $24,000. They were not paid last year, probably because they were closed. Didn't request that, so I reduced the $24,000 back down to their annual allotment of $12,000 in the current fiscal year. City clerk's budget, just over $17,000 increase there, and that is the additional cost for the general election, specifically for the Measure S campaign and the added cost there. One more slide on appropriation changes and administrative services, because you do have an administrative services director position that's vacant. There is salary savings that's been incurred to date of about just under $52,000. City attorney, actually reducing that budget by $25,000 based on costs incurred to date being lower than anticipated. So that budget is coming into line. And then transfers out. So I added a transfers out appropriation to the general fund of just over $154,000, which is the anticipated general fund share to offset costs necessary for the seven temporary firefighter personnel in Fund 63. So we'll go through that on a specific slide, but this is the anticipated need from the general fund to balance that fund out for those 7 firefighters. On the next slide, what I wanted to share with the City Council is just what the base budget looks like for the committees and commissions budget moving forward. So this is the typical annual base budget that is put in. So just go through this real quick. City historian gets $500. The library and both ACTV get $12,000 each. Undesignated sponsorships, which goes for things like fireworks, leadership Auburn, et cetera, has $2,500 in it. Many times this comes in more than that, and other areas in this budget are used to pay for those things. Arts Commission, $35,000. Economic Development Commission, $20,000. Endurance Capital Committee, $8,500, and then the SHAC committee gets $2,500. So there is $93,000 built into the base budget, which is part of the forecast moving forward. So the forecast that you're going to see for the next few years actually includes all of these amounts each year in every one of those years in the forecast. Just wanted to make sure that the council knew that this was being accounted for in the forecast. Next slide, please. So when you take all that into account, if we actually receive the amount of revenue that we think we're going to receive with the updated revenue totals and actually spend the amount that we think we're going to spend with the updated appropriation totals, reserves will be just about 5.51 million by the end of this fiscal year on June 30th, 2021. Those reserves are made up of an economic contingency reserve of $2.7 million, a pension unfunded liability reserve of $2.2 million, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Prepaid insurance costs for workers' compensation and general liability, $226,000. The police department has a donation reserve of just over $4,500 that they have. And then you have unobligated or unreserved fund balance of just over $380,000. Looking at the pension unfunded liability reserve, please keep in mind that we are currently in the validation state associated with issuing a potential pension obligation bond. As an update, we'll tell you that there are several cities that have issued pension obligation bonds in the past, in the last couple of weeks, and their rates are coming in extremely competitive as demand for actually purchasing these bonds has increased significantly. So at least one city got less than 3% on a very large size bond. So it's looking really positive right now. I'm hopeful that the validation gets done quickly so that we can put the rating agency presentation together and actually move forward with this in short order and get a good rate like that, because that's pretty cheap money when you think about less than 3%. But that 2.2 million that you have set aside may be freed up for something else to the extent the council decides to frame this bond issue a certain way or another way. So that 2.2 million will be in play, and that will be coming forward as we do the bond issue. That $5.5 million does actually represent 40.6% of all the expenditures in fiscal 2021. So very prudent level of reserves. Next slide, please. All right, so this is your forecast. And I apologize for the graininess of the numbers, but it was a long slide and I had to squish it and stretch it, and it became very difficult to do that. So I'll try to get through this. But what you have here is you have 2 years finished, fiscal 18-19 and fiscal 19-20. You might recall that the deficit in fiscal 18-19 was because of the carryover of the overlay money. So that really wasn't a deficit. It's just the way the accounting worked out as you had surpluses in previous years. But for fiscal 19-20, we actually did recognize a surplus of $172,414. Some of that money actually is set aside for the PSPS grant. So that is in a reserve, and that's slated to be spent in the current fiscal year. And then you also have an Arts Commission donation that was received for the Shade Park, $20,000 or so that was spent. And also the police reserve is in there as well. So the $172,000 is pretty close to being flat when you take out those designated reserves from the $172,000. So all in all, fiscal 19-20 actually turned out to be a pretty decent year for the city from the general fund perspective when you consider that the pandemic began in March and really started impacting us heavily in April and May. So that's good news with fiscal 19-20. We'll talk more about that when we bring the audit back to the council. This year, we anticipate $82,000 for fiscal 2021, and then you can see what the balance of the forecast looks like long-term. 142 goes up to 425 in 22-23, and that's because you have a significant drop-off of the pension obligation bond debt, where the debt service goes down quite a bit in that year. And then you see there's a systemic rise of about $100,000, just under $100,000 a year, all the way through fiscal 26-27. So again, one caveat to this, is that this forecast is based on a base budget. So it assumes that base stays intact. All positions are currently authorized or assumed filled. So every position is filled. Only negotiated salary increases are built in, which are none. Okay, so right now there are no salary increases that have been negotiated and approved. So this doesn't include any impacts of any future salary increases. And this does not build in any offset that's required, which is that $154,000 that we're recommending you adjust the general fund transfer out by. With this budget, doesn't include any offset for the 7 temporary firefighters moving forward. So it assumes Fund 63 is whole each year. The big caveat that I want to mention here is that I have built in the forecast that HDL is projected for sales tax, which essentially says that by the end of fiscal 22-23, sales tax will be back to normal. Probably will, but just want to throw that out there and mention that. Okay, next slide, please. This is the mayor's favorite slide, and this talks about our current state of Calpers employer costs and kind of where we're at. You can see that on an actual basis in fiscal 18-19, about $1.9 million was spent for Calpers, and that included the pension obligation bond, which is in the green, the unfunded liability amortization, which is in the orange, and the normal cost, which is in the blue. So you can see in fiscal 22-23, that green portion, that pension obligation cost actually goes down quite a bit. That's where you're seeing the big jump in the financial model that shows the surplus go from $100 to about $400,000. But in this model, you can also see that that orange bar grows over time. And these are the anticipated costs to the general fund for the unfunded liability, that orange bar is. And those will become very flat to the extent the city issues a pension obligation bond. And it will make a huge difference in actually what we will be paying in the future. So one chart I'll do for you that once we issue the pension bond is keep this chart intact and then show you what it looks like moving forward. And it will be dramatic in terms of the amount of the savings that the city can actually have once we issue that pension obligation bond. Okay, so that rounds out the general fund. Now I'll move into some of the other funds in the city, particularly the 2 enterprise funds. Real quickly, in the airport, $1.6 million budget on the revenue side is estimated to be about $989,000 now, a reduction of $656,000. And this is because we anticipate the helicopter parking area project to continue into next year. And we've lowered both the revenues and expenditures alike to reflect the anticipated actuals. So that's why you see the drop of about $724,000 on the expenditure side for the airport as well. All other larger capital projects funding is relatively unchanged. And again, to the extent this capital at the airport is not completed, it will likely be carried over into the next fiscal year. Having said that, however, the projected airport fund balance by the end of this year will be a very healthy $1.7 million. Any helicopter expenses that are carried over into next year just have an offsetting revenue associated with an FAA entitlement grant. So that $1.7 million is a very solid number moving forward. Next slide, please. In the other enterprise fund, the sewer fund, we have a recommended adjustment on the revenue side of about $85,000. And that's just simply related to the higher collection of connection fees, which we don't really budget at the beginning of the year, but recognize as the year goes on. On the expenditure side, a reduction of about $6.7 million, and this is just all capital. So it's what we anticipate finishing over the next 5 months, and most of that $6.7 million is related to capital and will be carried over into the next year. So Sludge watering is impacted by that, the Citadel Val, Diamond Ridge Lift Station, and the Borland Sewer realignment. Projected sewer fund balance is about $14.3 million. $1.2 million of that is reserved for a specific purpose. It's a debt service reserve for the most part. So you can see very healthy sewer fund balance as well. Next slide. Moving into the other special revenue funds on the gas tax, we just have one small change there, and this is merely an accounting change and does not impact the budget for the current year in any way, shape, or form. So at the end of last year, we actually had an overlay project where we put the expenditure in last year, but we actually had to put that expenditure in fiscal 2021 related to accounting rules. So we had to increase the expenditure side, but that $247,000 in expenditures was covered by a carryover fund balance for the same amount. So the gas tax fund is, as far as the budgets for 2021 is concerned, is whole. We still have the $500,000 in new overlay money allocated in fiscal 2021. So no change in that whatsoever. Assuming we do all that, we will have about $57,000 left in the gas tax fund at the end of the fiscal year. Next slide, please. Transportation fund, really no changes here. And just wanted to mention that this transportation fund does maintain $300,000 in funding for the annual overlay project, and also that the Nevada Street project will likely be closed out this year and be made whole. So there's really no changes to what was budgeted for the current year. Don't anticipate any anomalies there. Next slide. Transit fund, similarly, no changes anticipated for the transit fund, 1.1 million in revenue, 1.1 million in expenditures. Very low fund balance as we try to spend all the transit money, for about $4,400 left at the end of the day. And it continues to appropriate $420,000 towards new buses that are funded by several sources, including CARES Act money, LCTOP, COCT, and HVIP funding. Next slide. Okay, property seizure fund. In the property seizure fund, this is actually the asset forfeiture money that's received for the city's participation in task forces, countywide task forces. So far, year to date, we actually have collected $135,662, and we'll likely collect more than that. But I only represent in the budget what's been collected to date. So a $35,000 increase there. And then the $95,000 expenditure that was originally approved as part of the amended budget is raised to $110,000 to account for new leases. And this is pretty much only for leases. So it pays for the city's police cars on an annual basis. Assuming we only bring in $135,000, which is likely to be more, and we spend the full $110,000, we will have $110,000 left in fund balance at the end of the year, which essentially pays for a whole another year of leases, which is a good place to be. So that is your property seizure fund. Mention one thing on the CDBG grants fund. No changes expected for this fund, and that should say projected CDBG grants fund balance at the bottom there. 38,000 at the end of the day, and that's assuming we make the anticipated allocation of the most of the funding available in the CDBG grants fund towards a business development loan that's currently underway. Okay. Next fund. Closed landfill fund. So in the closed landfill fund, not making any changes to this budget, although this may be a topic of conversation as we prepare the budget with the various meetings that we're going to have with the city council and the public for fiscal 21-22. You can see that we've got $228,000 in revenue, and that represents the share of the franchise fee that the city receives from Ecology specifically for the closed landfill. Then you have an expenditure side of about $245,000, and that represents the city's recurring costs that the city pays for things like insurance, things like PG&E, things like the wastewater treatment associated with the runoff from the closed landfill, all of that. Typically, these amounts should be equal, or the revenue should be more, and they're not anymore. Okay, which is why you have a projected closed landfill fund balance at the end of this year of just under $135,000 to the negative. So it's got a negative fund balance. All right. These expenditures only include the ongoing costs associated with maintaining the closed landfill. They do not include any of the compliance costs that we will likely need to undertake to bring the landfill in compliance with an array of new things that are required by the state. So that has not been built in yet. But what I do want to say is that staff does continue to work with Recology to determine the ultimate funding requirements, and more importantly, a funding plan for both the ongoing costs, because they have to be sustainable, and new compliance requirements. And what this means is, in the short run, it may require a general fund infusion of some sort, and or we may need to look at rates that are being charged, currently being charged, and an increase to those rates for this component. So this is something that's in flux. There have been a lot of conversations, I can tell you, that have been happening with Recology on this closed landfill, and you'll be hearing more about this as the budget for 21-22 is being developed. Stop there on that one. Facilities and Equipment Replacement Fund, just a note there, a recommended adjustment upwards in expenditures by $15,000 to include, we needed a new sweeper engine, so that was purchased out of that fund. The projected FEP fund balance will be about $140,000 by the end of the year, which is a good balance. Next fund. Fire Equipment Fund. This is Fund 63, and this basically houses the 7 FTE temporary firefighters. The budget at the beginning of the year, we anticipated receiving about $636,000 in revenue, and the estimated amount at the end of the year is $680,000, because we have $680,000 in expenditures. So both those budgets are adjusted upward by $44,000. This assumes that all 7 firefighters are filled through the end of the fiscal year, okay? And there are a couple of vacancies that currently exist, and there could be a couple of more. So we'll watch this, but nonetheless, to the extent we're providing a level of service, those shifts will need to be backfilled moving forward. But this fund is projected to have a 0 fund balance, and that is because we have $154,000 that will be needed, more than likely needed, from the general fund to balance the fund. So all of that is built into everything that's going on with this budget. Okay. So let's move on to the next one. So that rounds out the special revenue fund. So real quickly, what is on tap for the fiscal 21-22 budget and beyond? We're looking at the economy and the recovery from the COVID environment. What does it look like? We're continuing to monitor it. We know that it didn't impact sales taxes to the degree that we thought it would. So that's a positive, but we know that there's still some things that need to happen in the local economy from a business and commerce perspective to get back to where we were. So we'll be watching that. Future stimulus. You may be aware that there more than likely will be another stimulus package that Washington will pass down to local cities. There's something out there right now that potentially gives Auburn just over $2.6 million for funding to be used for, in my opinion, something that's ambiguous right now, but will start to flesh itself out as things move forward. What I've seen so far is that this money can be used for the revenue replacement, to the extent that revenue replacement is measurable at the city level. It can be used for COVID impacts, direct impacts of the COVID on the local economy. It can be used for the homelessness issues and an array of other things. But I'm sure that will flesh itself out. I know that Washington is, or that actually, I believe the League of California Cities is trying to keep this a direct allocation to the cities and not have any intermediaries like the state get involved. So we'll see exactly what happens with this, but following this to the extent that information becomes available. But $2.6 million is the number that's out there. And then there's also something out there for potentially additional airport funding coming as part of that package as well. So we'll be watching that. We have the issuance of the pension obligation bond. Hopefully we can get that done by April 2021 and get that in place. That will have a significant impact on next year's budget because we'll be paying far less for that unfunded liability amortization. We have the development of a 5-year capital plan that you've heard about previously, and really working with the departments that have capital programs to understand exactly what's on tap capital-wise, and then more importantly, how it will be funded in the future. And then we will continue to update the comprehensive general fund multi-year forecasts to assure maintenance of long-term fiscal sustainability. And that's what you've seen tonight. Looking at that. Next slide. So this is a tentative budget development process calendar. So the goal setting and the strategic planning, February and March of 2021. So we're currently in that right now. City Council budget workshops slated for April 12th and potentially April 26th. If we need another one with the City Council, we'll review the budget requests from citywide committees and commissions at this time. Review citywide workload indicators, and then look at the base budget update as this model unfolds. Public budget workshops, as the mayor mentioned at the outset of this presentation, to be determined, and we will have those. And then consideration of the whole budget for 21-22 sometime in June of 2021. So I will stop there and answer any questions that the council might have.
Thank you very much, Andy, for the presentation. Excellent as always. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the rest of the council. Daniel has his hand up, so I'll go ahead and start with Councilman Berlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple questions, Andy. Thank you for the presentation. Appreciate the numbers. Obviously, I think everybody is probably happy to see us being in a much better position than we thought we would be 6 months ago. But I do have a few questions, just trying to dive in a little bit more in some of the changes. So maybe we could just start with some of the revenue changes. Not tonight, but would it be possible for you to provide to the council how each of the different funds or revenue sources compare to average? It was nice to see, where we kind of going up and down compared to what we anticipated at the beginning of this fiscal year, but we went into this fiscal year knowing that we were in the middle of a pandemic. And so there were a lot of, monkeying around with, and I say that, but I know it's much more scientific in your expertise to kind of guesstimate where we would be. But I'd be very curious to kind of see where are we compared to normal? Because as I looked at some of the past year budgets, our revenue in total is higher than really what it was in the previous budgets. Your table kind of showed it that it's more an average, but when you look at the actual budgets, when we passed them, we were in the high 12 millions for the general fund, and here we're at 13. So it would be helpful, at least for me, and I would assume others, to kind of see where are we compared to an average year.
Okay.
The next question is on the traffic fines, and I asked some of these to John, and I think there's some you mentioned too on the onset that there's a little bit additional research, but $100,000 difference to me is pretty significant. That seemed to be one of the biggest ups and downs that I don't really understand how a pandemic would change that. And I guess the easiest question would be to the chief: are we writing less citations, and are there less crimes that are that the courts could find as punishable? So, I mean, do we know going into this year that we had less tickets being issued that would then generate fees from the courts? Or, and this is why I think it's a more question, or is the state holding back money, or is there, there's always games that the states play with the court's money. So curious if you have more, insight onto that, because it's just there's a pretty big difference. It doesn't really seem to be pandemic related.
Yep. Are you waiting for the?
Yeah, I don't know if you had any other insight besides what you provided.
That is something that we will look into. In fact, when the traffic fines went way up, because they used to be at the level that they're at currently, just 4 or 5 years ago, okay? Then they started this evolution way up, okay? And what I thought was a long time ago, they had taken a portion of the traffic fines and the civil fines for construction of the courthouse and for various other things that the county had going on. And I had thought that maybe that went away. Well, I don't know if the county is taking them again for something like that, and or if indeed it is because we're writing less citations and there's less DUI schools going on and those sorts of things that we get a share of as part of those fines. But they went up a lot, and I really didn't get an explanation on why they went up. And now they're going back down, and it's difficult to get, but I will do my best to work with the county auditor, controller, and or the sheriff or DA to find out exactly what's going on.
So Councilmember Berlin, I have a follow-up question, and I think I understand. I just want to clarify though, for maybe those who don't, that was a question I had, and thank you, Daniel, for bringing that up. You mentioned the county, and you just elaborated a little bit. And obviously, City of Auburn Police Department writes citations. Those citations then get paid to the county, or do they come directly to the city? I think I know the answer, but I'll ask anyway.
I believe they go to the county. So
and that's where
the revenue will go.
They keep certain funds back and only give us a portion of those revenues or fines or citations.
Yeah, the allocation comes from the auditor controller's office, right?
Okay.
Yeah,
Daniel,
I appreciate that, Mr. Mayor. And Andy, I guess I look forward to when we get into budget development, where that is, because that's a pretty big change. And a good point, though, I guess, that is pandemic related. The courts were shut down, for a number of months. So I assume there's a backlog. And that's why I guess I'm just curious with two pieces of this, and I'll leave it there and we can bring it back in budget development. But one, is this a trend that we're seeing across the state, or is this a Auburn issue only? And then the second piece was, again, just kind of looking at, do we have metrics from the police department to say, here's how many citations we've issued that went to the courts and we haven't seen them be adjudicated. And thus we know that the courts maybe, again, are just backlogged using the money for other appropriate things. Or is it a longer, a more systemic issue across the state? I guess that's my only comment / question, which I would hope we could dive into. And the only reason I pick on this, because I don't think traffic fines, this should be an incentive for us of revenue by any means, but it's such a big, sway that I think it just requires us asking the question. So appreciate you looking into that a little bit more. I have another one that maybe you can't dive into tonight, but again, I think it's important for us as we get into budget development for next year, and that's TOT. So, there's obvious assumptions that could be made that, less people are traveling because of the pandemic, and so hotel usage is down. But I am curious if we dive into it a little bit more. You mentioned the Holiday Inn. I know that in the onset of the pandemic, the county was renting out the Elmwood and paying full price. And so they were actually paying a higher price. And my understanding was even with using Project Roomkey, they were still paying TOT dollars. And so Elmwood, I would then assume, would be up a little bit. And I guess the reason I asked them the Holiday Inn is, talking to them, is it because of low usage? Because I know in the wintertime, PG&E and other utilities use it quite a bit during winter months. Is it really usage is down? Is it lower rates because they're trying to, attract people? And I guess the third part of it is, this is really the first year that we're in where we've had the Marriott competing against us. And so I'm curious if the Holiday Inn, again, is experiencing competition, low usage because of the Marriott. And so back to, because TP is showing a pretty big swing down, I guess I would see if we could do a little bit more diving into specifics from them to help us planning for the future. The last thing on revenue, businesses licenses. I know that we've had some businesses go out of business during the pandemic. I think we've all talked about them over the year. Not a lot though. And so I'm curious, one of the things that was brought up at the Old Town Business Association was businesses not paying their business license fee. And so just curious if we're doing any reconciling or have any plan to do reconciling for businesses that are operating within the city, not with a valid business license.
So one of the things that is done here quite regularly is for those that had a business license in the previous year that did not close it out, it's assumed that they're going to be in business in the current year. They will get a business license renewal form. When they don't pay that, there are several iterations of notices that go out, ultimately that say, you're late, either pay it or tell us you're out of business, or so we can move forward. Once those notices go out so many times, we actually do turn that information over to collections, at which point, we collect on some of it, hopefully. So that is the process.
So Andy, do you have a?
Yeah, but we can check and see exactly.
You reduced it by 10,000. Not sure where
right.
in where we initially budgeted at the beginning of the fiscal year. Just curious if we have a number of, i.e., 10,000 means that there are 20 less businesses, 200 less businesses, and then trying to dive into those 200. Did they really go out of business, or did they just not pay?
And we'll have to look specifically at that data, compare it to last year. When this forecast was put together, what I did was I took a couple of different points in time throughout the fiscal year and compared what had been collected this year versus last year. And then made the estimate that, we're going to be a little bit lower than we were last year. So
the only reason
just to piggyback, Daniel,
real quick, Councilwoman, the only reason I hit on it for everybody else is at the Old Town Business Association, we had this discussion for them more about the business improvement district's revenue that the BID brings in. But the concern that many of the businesses have, that they believe there are businesses doing business within the city that haven't paid their business license fee and thus the BID fee. And so, I think we need to treat our businesses with the kid gloves to support them during these tough times. But I just raised the concern that there are business owners out there that think that there are business owners who are not paying their business license fee, operating without a business license, thus kind of creating a little bit of an unfair advantage. Sorry, Councilman Donna Calvillo, I just wanted to finish that point, but you can go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to say, I wonder if that was at all impacted. Remember, we approved the $25,000 transfer to the chamber, and we were actually going to take that from business license revenue. So could that have been included in some of these numbers then, Andy?
No, not.
Okay, so that's not
of
reflected. I was hoping that maybe that could have been in there. Okay, all right.
Moving over to expenditures, Andy, the fire department overtime makes sense. But my question is, do you have a breakdown for the fire department overtime, the difference between strike team overtime, which obviously we're reimbursed for, versus what we're paying to backfill behind vacancies?
I'd have to look that up specifically. I know that we have had vacancies that have driven overtime up, and we have also had a couple of workers' comp claims that essentially require overtime for every shift that is missed. So that will add up very quickly. Yeah, and you are right.
Sorry.
So yeah, the strike team overtime should be reimbursed in full. And that's part of the reconciliation process that we have to do as part of the whole reimbursements when they come in, what's in Fund 63, what's in Fund 45, to make sure we get that right.
Yeah, I would just appreciate the follow-up, because I think for us, it would be good to know whether most of that overtime increase is because of strike teams, which again, totally makes sense. We're reimbursed it, not a big deal. But if it's because of vacancies and that is a systemic problem, then I think that it's going to require some additional discussion. And from what I've heard, especially talking with some of our fire department folks and folks at the local, is there is a lot of overtime that's being forced on them to backfill behind vacancies for a number of reasons. And so it'd be helpful for us, I think, to see what that looks like, so that we can start having the conversation in budget development of how do we kind of get that in order, because overtime is common in public safety, police and fire, obviously, but if it's a systemic problem and that's a big portion of it, I personally think it warrants some greater discussion by council.
Thank you.
A few more, and I know I went first, but the budgets that you laid out that you have kind of looking out for the next 10 years or so, you made the point that said the out years are all assuming all positions are filled, because we have a lot of vacant positions that are unfilled at the moment. I'm curious though, the negotiated 2% increase that we had this year that the employees gave up, is that included in the out years, or will that be required to go back to negotiations to reinstate that or bring it back for the next fiscal year?
That is not built into the model. So to the extent that that is provided to the employees, it will have to be added back.
So I take it then that that's a negotiated item. If they want the 2% that we had already agreed upon, they gave up because of the fiscal crisis we were in. If they choose to ask to reinstate that, that's a negotiated item. It's not an assumed piece of the outgoing years. From
my perspective in developing a forecast, it is a negotiated item.
Okay. In the gas tax fund, and this may be a question for John, that you mentioned the amount both in gas tax and in transportation funds set aside for street overlay. There's only 4 months left in the fiscal year. Curious if we're going to hear anytime soon what the street overlay plan for this fiscal year is going to look like.
Yeah, I'll answer that. It's in development right now. Matter of fact, we talked about it at the staff meeting this morning. So they are working up the overall plan on that. And one of the things that's kind of delayed is getting our GIS system up to speed. That'll coordinate into it, but it was in discussion today. So you can look for that to come forward in the next couple of months.
Okay, thank you.
I will just really quickly add on that. I did have a conversation with Menjel. He's in communication with Placer County's roadway maintenance manager, Kevin Tabor. So they're in communication. We're working to try to piggyback on their contract. So we are certainly working pretty aggressively to get those monies effectively spent.
So I had that question, but I knew that you would be on top of it. I've already that, we all have our annual questions. So thank you for clarifying that as well. Just 2 more funds for questions for me. Landfill fund. What's our, you kind of mentioned it, but what's the actual plan to incorporate the compliance requirement estimates into the budget? Will that be in budget development for this coming fiscal year? Or I guess we've kind of started some discussions here in the budget that there's this looming compliance requirements, but I haven't really seen any action to actually start putting money aside, either transfers from the general fund, putting them in as designated funds out of our reserve, or raising revenue, raising fees, all of which take time and public discussion. Curious though, Andy, when your thoughts of actually incorporating that into the budget will be.
So I know there are some hard dates that are coming up where certain things need to be done. Like we need an action plan, we need a funding plan that needs to be approved and sent to the state, something that says that we have the wherewithal to meet these costs long term. And that has to be done, I think, before the start of the fiscal year. So I can pretty much say that as the budget is being developed, we will bring this information back to the council. And it will be definitely be included as part of budget development. So you'll be seeing that probably in short order. I know things are moving now.
Sandy, I think you do a wonderful job of really looking out in your projections, and I know that's really your expertise in statewide. But I just think we are doing ourselves a disservice in this fund to not be putting some money away, not be designating some money, not be talking publicly about the potential millions that compliance may or may not cost us. But if we're not at least setting aside, this looks like a very healthy budget. And maybe that's part of the overall theme of this budget, is that it's a much better than we anticipated. But there are some potential anticipated costs that are pretty costly, that I guess I advocate that we are not just waiting to hear a little bit more about what the compliance requirements really will be, but starting to set aside some money so that we at least are better, have a jumping off point to address any costs that the state throws our way.
Right.
And I was just going to say, to follow up on that, Councilman Berlant, Andy, I know that our financial assurance deadlines, I believe those are required by March. So that is something that we have to have in place before the budget is actually adopted. I know that I think we can, I forgot the name of it. It's on the tip of my tongue. It's just a demonstration of revenue that we have pledged that we have revenue sufficient for those financial assurances. But that is something that we have to demonstrate before the budget. So just wanted to throw that in there.
I guess the reason I bring it up is the fact that, we have this healthy reserve, right? 40% is a pretty good percentage to be in, but we know that there's these expenditures. And so I would just assume, and again, I'm making an assumption now, but not when we get into budget development, that at minimum, we're designating some of that reserve and putting it into a designated, I know fund's not the right word, and I don't know what the Gatsby word would be, but we're designating that money just like we do the pension unfunded liability, designating it. So even if we decide we need to raise rates because of it, even if we decide to do some other revenue source, I just would say, I think it would be a shame on us if we're not at least putting aside some money so that we are prepared should the state send some compliance requirements that are costly our direction.
I completely agree with both you, Councilman Berlant, and Councilman Don Cavillo. I do think that the negotiations are still ongoing between the parties, and trying to understand where we're going to land with all of this is still early, but it should be a part of our discussions as we go into this budget cycle, because it could potentially either be a significant or well, I think significant personally, impact to our ratepayers, or a significant impact to the city as a whole through the general fund. So yes, I think that needs to be a part of our discussions moving forward. So thank you. Councilman Berlant, did you have any more comments?
I just have one more question. I'm sorry. So Fund 63, the adjustment now shows us bringing in the special equipment, fire special equipment fund, $680,000 in revenue. What confused me a bit is in your presentation, and the slides aren't numbered, but in the general fund changes section, you show transfers out, and you show the 7.0 temp fire personnel, the $154,000 as a negative number. But in all of the other references in the slide before, the negatives are where there are savings. So would it be, is it really a negative number?
It's a cost to the general fund. So it's reducing the amount available to the general fund. So that cost is a transfer out, which is like an expenditure in the general fund. That's why I have to increase it. Okay, I have to increase the appropriation side on the general fund to account for that transfer out of that cost to go into Fund 63 to make it whole, where it's a transfer in as part of the revenue. So that $680,000 on Fund 63 is comprised of $530 some odd thousand worth of strike team prepositioning, all that kind of stuff, and $150,000 from the general fund.
Okay, I guess what throws me off then, Andy, is on the slide where we have savings in other areas. Public Works said there was a salary savings of $87,000. It's shown as a negative number too. So wouldn't that actually be a positive then?
Oh, yeah, you're right. It's a positive. Yeah.
Okay, so the salary savings should be positive, but 154 should be a negative.
You got it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, I had a lot of questions.
You're right.
Thank you, Councilman Berlant. I'm going around my screen here, so I'm going to go next to Councilwoman Amara, please.
Thank you, Mayor Spokely. Well, Daniel asked about every question I could even think of. No, seriously, I was going to ask a lot of those questions. However, one I'd like to go into a little deeper is the fire overtime. I think Daniel's concern about the difference between the strike team versus backfilling is appropriate. And I guess my question is, just for a little more insight, how many are on workers' comp? How many are retired? Can you provide us with that kind of information? And is there something we can do about that? Because I do agree that could be very costly. And if there's something we can do about that, I think we need to look into that. So are there a lot on workers' comp versus vacancies, or is it all workers' comp?
I'll let the chief respond to
that. Thank you, Councilwoman Amara. For the record, Dave Spencer, your fire chief. This fiscal year, we have 3 workers' comp cases, 2 of which were significant extremity injury that required surgical repair. One of those has returned to full duty at this time. The second one will be out for another several months as a result of that injury. We have a third that's also on workers' comp that is still in the process of being diagnosed. Because he's in the workers' comp system, it is not favorable for a quick treatment. And so we have to navigate through that process. And That's just part of the workers' comp system that we're in the state of California. We do everything we can to move that forward. So that accounts for significant overtime for backfill behind those 3 folks. We do have to date 3 other positions that have actually accepted positions with other agencies. And I'll tell you, I'm actually proud to say that we have some of the top performers that are being selected for large agencies in the region and are competitive folks that we have trained well. And so I can't complain about that. They're doing the best for themselves as they move forward. And then I anticipate that there will be 2 more in the next 2 weeks coming forward. And so that's the status of our staffing right at the moment. And I hope that answers your question.
Okay, so to be clear then, so you've temporarily backfilled the 3 workers' comp positions? Is that what I hear you saying?
Yeah, our constant staffing requires us to fill behind with overtime. We can't leave the seat vacant in this particular situation because emergency services and certainly in the fire service, we can't down staff, if you will.
Well,
And
okay. So I guess my question was, did you, so there's 3 on who are out due to workers' comp. And you said that you have hired 3 other part-time firefighters or no? Is that, I must have misunderstood you.
No, all of
Backfilling with overtime.
Yeah, we're backfilling with overtime. The individuals that are currently being hired with other agencies have just been released in the last 3 months. The first one took place in December. 1 vacancy really isn't an issue for us, and then we had 2 more just in this last 20 days. So we're not in a position to spin up that fast to replace those folks. So those are current activity that's happening.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Thank you. That answers my question.
Just as a quick follow-up to that, just wanted to ask if that many people are out and we're anticipating 2 more are leaving, is there a posting out now? I don't want to overwork our firefighters so much that they end up getting more injuries, because that tends to happen if people work too many hours of overtime. So do you have a plan for making sure that our folks aren't overworked?
Yeah, so I've been meeting with the labor group and we have come to an agreement as to how we're going to move forward and make sure that we protect our people, make sure that we're not overworking them and exposing them to unnecessary injury or mental health issues as well. And so we'll be moving forward with that.
Great, thanks.
Okay, and just Mayor Spokley, a couple more follow-up. These are general questions because specific questions have been asked and answered very well. And thank you, Andy, by the way. I love your detailed report and I like the optimistic report. It looks better than what we had anticipated, and that's very good news. And I'm really am looking forward to when you said April, our insurance pension obligation bond will hopefully kick in and we'll have some more savings in that regard. My question is just generally though, do we know, did we lose revenue as a result of COVID? Is there a way of forecasting or telling us whether or not there was any impact? It doesn't look like there was, but I'd be interested to know.
We absolutely lost money during COVID. The mere fact that the largest sales taxpayer in the city, Flyers Energy, you just have to look at what their receipts have been, and it's very, very easy to tell. One thing that is sort of skewing the sales tax equation is the fact that you have a huge increase in the amount of sales tax coming from the county pool related to the Wayfair decision. And that's been growing over time. Okay, so as more people buy things on the internet and as more sales tax gets distributed through the county pool because of those sales on the internet, the city benefits from that. So that's offsetting some of the losses on the regular sales tax side from gasoline or transportation or retail or wherever else that their sales tax is down. But it is overall absolutely down.
And do we know how much? can you give us an indication even at the next budget workshop? I'd be curious to know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if COVID hadn't happened, we'd have probably seen $400,000 to $500,000 more in sales tax.
Okay. Okay. And then this might be premature, but with Prop 19 and the property reassessment, will that give us additional revenue for the cities, or is that all for state? Are you aware of that?
Yeah, I'm aware of it, but I don't know what the impacts are going to be at this point just yet.
Okay. Okay. And that's all I have right now. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Matt, you're muted.
Sounded really good on my end. I said, we'll move on around my screen here to Councilwoman Dowden Calvillo.
Yes, who you told me to note that I was next, and I responded to everybody. So sorry about that. Technology
Trying to give everybody a heads up.
I'm in Brown, and we've got a Brown Act here. So any event, thank you very much. And Andy, thank you very much for this detailed presentation. I poured over all the documents. I had some questions for John earlier today. Daniel did a great job of really digging deep. Actually, a lot of the questions that I had were questions that Daniel already asked. I was concerned about the traffic citation. That was a huge issue for me. The overtime with fire department and the landfill issue. I did have an opportunity to meet with Auburn Ecology, and John and I are going to meet later this week to talk about some of that further. But there are some significant issues there. I think we're all aware of them, and we are going to need to do something to address those. So John and I, like I said, we're going to sit down with some documents and go over that on Friday and go from there. But other than that, I'm glad to see that we're not as bad as we forecast. That's certainly good news that we are able to keep our fire station, our third firehouse staffed. Hopefully we'll be able to address the vacancies that we have there. As Council Member Riddell Harris had mentioned, that's important that if we do have vacancies and we're working these folks overtime, that we get those positions filled as soon as possible so that we don't get burnout, especially given that we're going to be going into the fire season soon. Let's see, I don't, really, at this point, after I also had the same question that Councilwoman Amara had about Prop 19. We did have a presentation at Medler's about that, and so I wondered about the potential impact to those increased sales tax, not sales tax, property tax for when they pass from from parents to children and so forth, and getting assessed at that higher rate. Let me just see though, but I think other than that, I look forward to our budget workshops and having the public, providing the public with an opportunity to provide input and going from there. And I'd also kind of like to talk more when we talk about our budget structure, maybe giving some of the committees a little bit different allocations, additional funds. Of course, those will be things we can talk about as we move forward in that process. So other than that, I don't really have any other questions. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Councilwoman Riddell Harris, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a couple quick questions. I'm new to this, so forgive me if I'm trying to figure a few things out. On the slide that, on several of the slides, it said lower benefit costs as a cost reduction. And was that because there were fewer people working, so the benefit costs were low, or has something changed with the benefits that it's reducing the benefit costs?
Could have been because of the number of people that were working, vacancy factors or whatever. It could also be because of the health insurance. So what happens when health insurance rates take effect January 1st, people make their change in open enrollment time, October, whenever it is, September, October. And many people choose to pay for choose to go with the lowest cost or change their plan to a lower cost. So all of that is updated in the model. And when I extrapolate it all out, if they're in a lower cost plan, it results in savings. So
okay, great,
thank you. That's where that's coming from. And in the budget also assumes that they spend, the city is self-insured for dental. So there's a fixed amount that's assumed for every employee that includes not only employee, but any dependents that they might have. If their usage of dental, year to date isn't what I budgeted, then again, extrapolating that out may result in a lower cost there as well. So there's a couple of things that can impact that benefits cost.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then I looked on all the budget sheets when I was reading through it, and it gave salary numbers, but there's nothing that says anything about FTEs. Is it possible for us to see with the departments, not just the salary, but the FTEs that are equaling that salary, just so I can get a sense of how that's kind of playing out?
Absolutely. Yep.
Rachel, that's definitely a part of our budget process. Each department reports FTEs, total FTEs, and so that's coming. You will definitely get a lot of that.
Okay, great. And then as far as contractual services, is it possible to get a list of the the contracts that we have, and I guess the department they're with, the service they provide, and if they're one-time or ongoing, just to kind of get a sense of everything like I know there's some things that are just we do all the time, and then there's some things where we're kind of doing one-time big projects, and I'm just trying to get a sense of how much we're contracting and to whom and all of that. So I just didn't know if that's possible.
Yep.
Another quick thing on the 2% pay increase, since that was already negotiated and the employees voluntarily gave it up because we were going to have a rough year and we didn't end up having that rough of a year, is it possible for us to just give it to them, or do we have to go through a negotiation process?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay, it just.
If I can take a shot at that.
Okay.
So technically we did renegotiate with the employees. We have side letter agreements with them regarding it, but
okay.
Good faith and acknowledgement is also something that needs to be taken into consideration. So I think as we move forward with working with our employees on things, taking that type of thing into consideration is absolutely critical, because
okay.
It was given up based on one assumption, but obviously I think good faith with employees is recognizing certain things and then going back to them, and expect us to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then lastly, on the closed landfill issue, I also spoke with Recology. And one of the things, since I've worked in doing environmental work for a while, is I know that the cost of these things just keeps increasing. And so I asked them if there's any kind of long-term solution we can have, so that way we don't have to keep increasing how much we're charging our customers over time. So that's something that I've talked to John about, and would really like to see if there's a way of mitigating that over time, rather than continuing to pay those increasing costs. So, and that's it.
Thank you very much. I know Councilmember Berlant has some follow-ups, but I'll go real quickly.
Yeah, and I do too. I do too. I have
Okay.
one more.
A couple of items that haven't been covered by the detailed questions that have been asked. My favorite slide, I think you mentioned this, Andy, slide 14 in your deck about the unfunded liability. Obviously, we're working through a bond initiative to try to mitigate those costs for the city. But that orange tier of our unfunded liability, each year it goes up. What was the assumption for annual increase on that orange bar? I probably ask you this every year, but I'm asking again. I'm not 100% sure what it is. Is it a 2 or 4 or 5% increase? What?
There's no assumption. That orange bar amount actually comes right out of the Calpers actuarial reports and the assumptions they use. So the assumptions they use are, there's X percent salary increase. I believe it's 3% per year that they build in. They also have a methodology that they use to amortize that, where it's a ramp up, ramp down, 5 years ramp up, 5 years ramp down, and then in between, the 10 years in between, it's flat. So all of that is built into each component of the unfunded liability, which is essentially every gain or loss by year, and any change in assumptions that are made through experience factors, or when they changed the amortization period from 30 years to 20 years, that obviously had an impact on the unfunded liability, discount rate, all that's built in. So It's all Calpers assumptions, and those numbers are dollar for dollar right out of their actuarial reports. So that's what they tell us that they think we're going to end up owing. And of course, the biggest assumption of all is that they anticipate earning 7% every year on their portfolio to generate that amortized amount.
And the decisions that the Calpers board makes in investment strategies certainly affects that rate of return. So that's my biggest concern in this, you know, it's been my biggest concern since I've been on the council is what is happening. I'll just make a comment here real quick. During our budget cycle, I'd like to hear, and I think everybody, well, I hope everybody would be interested to understand what our unfunded liability is on a total basis. And that can be in one of our budget meetings. I believe you and I, on a number of occasions, have had that conversation. The number is staggering, but I would like to have that reported to the entire council so we could all just understand again exactly what that is as we move forward. Appreciate the work we're doing on the bond initiative. I think it's going to save the city a lot of money, so that's great. I'll move on. Next slide I had was slide 15 of your presentation. It was related to the airport. I believe I saw a pretty significant decrease in revenue, $660 or so thousand as decrease in revenues. Did I read that right? And if so, what is?
Yeah, there's a commensurate decrease in revenue and expenditure, because the expenditure that decreased was the helicopter parking area, and that is funded by an FAA grant. So I reduced FAA grant revenue and just moved it'll all move into next year. Basically.
Okay, got it. I won't mention landfill. It's been mentioned a couple of times by my fellow council members. I guess the last comment I wanted to make, and maybe this is just a kudos to Chief Canan in continuing the special work that we're doing on task force, but the property seizure fund just continues to amaze me. It affords us to, you know, lease vehicles and other things based on those detectives' works. So thank you, Chief Canan, and your officers and detectives for that work. That's amazing. I'll circle back now to Councilmember Lant. I think you had a follow-up question.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just had a quick question. Spinning off your response to Councilwoman Amara's question about sales tax, your response confused me just a little bit. So with the Wayfair ruling that collects sales tax from online vendors that are from out of state, you made it sound like it offsets losses, but there's still sales tax on products. It's just a shift from local stores within our city boundaries to the internet, correct? So it's really not an offset, it's just a change in where that sales tax is collected. Is that accurate?
Yes and no, okay? And the no answer is mainly due to, keep in mind that these online sales go into the county pool. So what happens is anything that is sold that's affected by the Wayfair decision that actually goes in the county pool in the county as a whole, regardless of the jurisdiction, Roseville, Rockland, Loomis, Colfax, Auburn, doesn't matter, okay? It goes into this county pool. And then that county pool is allocated based on our share of sales tax as a percentage of the county's sales tax as a whole, okay? So we're actually receiving a bigger majority of that because we have so much sales tax on fuel, okay, than we otherwise would. So our participation in the pool significantly generates more than we would otherwise get if people just bought online and Auburn.
Okay, makes sense. Appreciate the explanation. And I guess just one follow-up to that follow-up. When we passed the budget that we're in June, at least the preliminary budget in June, it's my understanding that in just looking at the document, we reduced sales tax by $440,000 for this fiscal year. That was what we put in the preliminary June budget. When in this update, you've increased it by $75,000. Just to be clear, is that $75,000 from what it normally would be, or 75,000 from the reduction of 440, I mean, we're still less sales tax by 380,000 some dollars.
Yeah, we're still less sales tax.
Okay,
We're
gotcha.
still
That's why I
less
think
sales.
I think for a couple of the questions that were there, it would really help if we could kind of see that comparison, because we are, in just looking at it, our revenue adjustment is higher than the decrease in revenue that we put in the preliminary budget that we passed in June, but it's all over the board. And some of these things are really reimbursements, not sales tax or tax, increases in tax as much as we decrease. Right. Being able to see a comparison and an average, I think would really help with that. But I think that Wayfair point is valid, but it's still sales tax, which I guess is still meaning that it's still a solid revenue stream for us, even if the methodology is a bit skewed in our favor. So thank you for Mr. Mayor for the follow-up. Andy, thanks. And I'll look for the follow-up of that comparison when you have a chance.
I have a quick follow-up to that, and then I'll get to you, Councilman Don Calvillo. The Wayfair decision and the pooling of those internet revenues, internet sales tax revenues, is hurting the city currently because of our significant decrease in our number one sales tax generator, the gas, the oil from Dwelly, right? I mean, that's kind of hurting us a little bit.
If we were collecting a typical amount of sales tax we would get from our largest sales taxpayer, our share of the county pool would definitely be more.
Okay, all right, thank you. Councilman Don Calvillo.
Yes, I wanted to ask about the Wayfair decision too, and maybe we've already covered some of the issues, but on that, is there any way to project or forecast what we might receive in those funds? I mean, the decision was implemented, for the first time we received revenues this budget year, right? Because of the Wayfair decision?
About 5 quarters ago, and it's been significant. Yeah.
So is there a way?
Yeah, HDL has forecasted that for us.
Okay.
But keep in mind, forecasts are all over the board right now. And, they're especially the sales tax forecasts, even HDL has put out forecasts where in the very following quarter, they're significantly adjusted upwards or downwards based on what they think. So no one really has a good idea about where we're going with this. So that would be the only caveat that I put in there. And I try to weigh that into these forecasts that I put together for your council. I want to stay on the conservative side. I hope revenues come in more. Nothing would please me more than that. But at the same time, I don't want them to come in lower than what we're anticipating. And I think that we've got a pretty good justification for the sales tax side, given the significant volatility in sales tax in the city of Auburn because of fuel.
And I'm okay with projecting on the conservative side. I'm much happier saying we've received more than we anticipated than we've received less than we anticipated. So I'm fine with that. It was just a matter of actually having some kind of a forecast for our budget building process. And, even if it is on the conservative side for that. And then also just with regards to the pension bond, actually when are you going to bring that back to the council for unfunded liabilities, the bond to cover our unfunded liabilities? When are we going to hear that?
We're hopefully late March or early April,
Okay.
Once the validation process is completed.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. And I have one final question, Andy. If I wanted to check sales tax revenues from a business who does their quarterly reporting, just to validate that those dollars are making it back to the city, is that something you can help me with? I've got calls into the county. I'm trying to get a hold of folks there. How do we just do a kind of reality check? Because again, businesses, some are down, some are up. If I've got some, you know, if I've got a business in town who's willing to share their reports with me, and I can say, okay, this is what they paid the county on a quarterly basis. Is there a way to individually check a business as those funds filter back down through the county to the city?
Yes. Okay. So
I've tried this before, by the way.
Yeah.
And I got back a very long, elaborative list of different categories and different, it almost made it too cumbersome to try to figure out.
So the sales taxes are paid by sales tax payers directly to the state. So then the state then takes that tax return and it is divvied up basically, and our city receives its 1% share based on that return saying that this is the allocation, and it goes to the city of Auburn. All of that data is then summarized by payer. So we have every payer in the city of Auburn by quarter. All of that data is summarized by HDL, and we have a database that has every payer for the last, 10 years or more that has paid sales tax in the city by quarter, and we can see exactly what they're doing. So if you have a taxpayer that is paid $100 in sales tax, well, we get essentially one over 7.5 of that because we get 1 over 7.5%, right? And you can do the math to make sure that that's exactly what's coming back to the city.
Okay,
And
so
in most cases it is.
So I can work with you and John to just check what's coming back to make sure it's consistent with what's being reported, paid.
Andy's going to be really polite. The answer is kind of. Yeah, some of us are privy to some pretty confidential reports, so we can kind of help you on that.
Okay, I say that again because once upon a time when I first got on the council, I was looking into this, and I reached out to the county, and they were kind and provided some very voluminous reports. And as I tried to go through it and figure it out, it was like, all right, I give up. So, all right, I'll reach out to you guys. Thank you very much. Any other questions for Mr. Heath? Amy, do we have any comments from anybody in the public?
There is no public comment on this item.
All righty, Andy, as always, thank you for the very thorough report and great presentation. Very much appreciated.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion
Thank you.
that we authorize for fiscal year 2020-21 budget mid-year adjustments to increase the estimate for the earned revenue for the city's general fund by $512,281 to $13,626,590. An increase in the appropriation of expenditures in the city's general fund by $469,949 to $13,544,381. And an increase in the general fund cash reserves by $82,209 to $5,510,697. And we adopt the modified budgets in accordance with the attached schedules for our special funds and enterprise and special revenue funds.
Second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second. And before we call roll here, Amy, I would like to maybe ask for your assistance. I do think it's important that we have a couple of workshops that we talked about through the budget cycle that we wanted to get on the agenda. I do think it's important for all of us council members to be present at those workshops. And I know we're talking about doing them in, midday-ish timeframes, so we can make sure folks who can't attend it in the evenings can be at these if they choose to. So could I ask you, Amy, to please shoot out a scheduling email so we can try to make sure we get as many of us on the docket to be at these meetings as possible. Would you mind doing that for us?
Absolutely. We can get that done tomorrow morning.
That would be fantastic, Amy. Thank you so much. Thank you, Council. Amy, go ahead and call roll, please.
Councilmember Berlant.
Aye.
Amara.
Yes.
Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Riddell Harris.
Aye.
And Mayor Stokely.
Yes. Thank you all. Great questions. Thanks for the report again, Andy. Appreciate it. Moving on to item 7, the Homeless Transient Strategic Plan 2020 update. Chief Canan, I see you're here in our meeting.
Here. Well, good evening, City Council. Ryan Canan, Chief of Police, and I will bring on the presentation, the PowerPoint right now, and I will share my screen.
Hey, as you're doing that, I just want to I want to thank you for your presentation, and your slides are amazing. So looking forward to your presentation.
All right, so I appreciate that. I just want to make sure that everybody can see the presentation now by everybody's eyes. Okay, good evening. Ryan Canan, your Chief of Police here. I have this opportunity to talk about the homeless strategic plan that we really rolled out starting at the end of 2018 and into 2019. So obviously homelessness was a big concern. It continues to be a big concern as we really continue to navigate these COVID times. I mean, just a lot of stuff going on. But at the end of 18, there was the completion of the ad hoc homeless committee that put together a whole host of ideas and plans to help deal with the homeless transient population here in the city of Auburn. We took that information and we created our own homeless transient strategic plan. It's a 3-year plan with 2 goals and objectives that we've talked about before. The first one being reducing the number of chronic homeless in the city of Auburn. And what we found is we used 2 different definitions. We used the Marvin Studies definition, which you can read there, but it highlights a person who's been homeless for more than 1 straight year, has had 4 homeless episodes in 3 years, as well as being a homeless person with a disabling condition. Along with that, because we had those definitions and we didn't necessarily have all the access, we weren't quite sure when we started this venture, that we created our own definition to use as well. And that was a person contacted, so 4 months during a 12-month rolling period. So if we contact them in 3 months, they didn't make that list, but if we contact them 4 times over that time frame, then they continue to stay on what we deem them as a chronic homeless. I think what you'll find is that definition is actually more restrictive than the Marvin Studies definition, because once someone gets housed, in theory, unless they're homeless for another 4 episodes or another 3 episodes, they're now taken off that chronic homeless list. So we actually created a definition that was more restricted for ourselves. The second goal and objective was the reduction of the nuisance type calls for service, which you'll see there are the 5 calls: camping, loitering, panhandling, trespassing, and suspicious activity. The goal was to identify the total numbers of calls for service and the number of chronic homeless, and then reduce both of those by 10% over the course of the 3 years. Again, we came across this, what we wanted to do is use a problem-oriented policing approach to deal with our issues. And one of those things was scanning. So in order to scan, you actually have to start identifying what your problems are and what the data tells you. And that's really what we spent most of 2019 doing, gathering that information, coming up with a strategic plan, and then being able to lay it all out there. And here's a slide that really just talks about the overarching program that we have here, our community action team. I know it focuses right now on the homeless issue that we have, but it's more of a global team that will deal with any collaborative issues that we have moving forward. And right now, obviously, our biggest item is the homeless issue here. But we use really not only the police department, but our partners with fire. So they help us out not only with the weed abatement issues, but there's times that they respond to warming fires or cooking fires, and they help deal with those issues. Code enforcement, obviously now housed here in the police department. They are the experts in our municipal code. A lot of the issues that we do find dealing with the homeless are more related to municipal code violations as opposed to law. Placer County Probation and Health and Human Services, as well as the Sheriff's Office and their POP team. And again, they have a pool of resources that we are able to tap into. Health and Human Services by far and probation are by far the biggest resources that we have. And they both do a lot for us. And I think we'll talk about Health and Human Services a little bit later as we continue. And then Public Works. I think these are a lot of the unsung heroes of the CAT team. A lot of the stuff that they will do is, like we talked about before, is cleaning up debris for us, or the landscaping, and they play a role in our SEPTED plan. So this is kind of a snapshot of what makes up our CAT team right now, certainly as we move forward with our homeless strategic plan. Here, I had to showcase our APD team a little bit. As many people are aware, we hired Community Service Officer Connor Johnson a little over a year ago. And part of that was to help us with our homeless issues themselves and really take this CAT team and move it forward. It also took us 3 iterations to hire a community service officer. So we're glad that he's here and doing this. And you'll see Jennifer Solomon played a significant role in this team as well in the creation of it. And then we have our officers there, Phil Izetta, Josh Egan, Vladi Grkovic, Sarah Roach, who's one of our newer officers. And then right now they're being led by Mike Metzger, one of our sergeants. So going into the chronic homeless data, you know, we talk about we set forward to do a 10% reduction in our chronic homeless. We started off at the end of 2019, we identified 41 chronic homeless based on those definitions. And over the course of 2022, we found we were able to reduce that by 22%, which comes about 16 individuals that we were able to either get help to through Health and Human Services or no longer are in contact with them. And now based on that, they've fallen off our list. We've helped 5, so there are 11 that we don't have information on where they went or if they've gone somewhere else. Unfortunately, not only did we get the 16 help or 16 no longer in contact with us, but we did see an increase in 7 folks here. So although we dropped 16, we added 7. So that's why we get to the 32 number. So I happen to be able to present this PowerPoint prior to the new Chiefs Advisory Council. And one of the things that they talked about was the mental health and the homelessness. You know, and this is probably our biggest struggle is with dealing with folks that have some type of mental health issues, whether it's mental health or it's some type of dependency issue, alcohol or substance abuse, drugs. But trying to get those folks the help that they need, really, as I highlight there, and that's a struggle. There's really no place for the mentally ill to go right now. We can kind of comment and say the issues and some of the low level crimes that are committed by these individuals does result them in going to jail for those low level crimes pre-COVID. Most of those weren't taken into county jail for during the COVID issue, but it's trying to get them help. It's trying to find these folks, trying to marry them up with the right resources. The reality is most of them don't want the resources until they eventually want them, whether it's through medication and they're properly medicated, then they're more reasonable to deal with when we're out there and they're more accepting of the services. Here's a slide that talks about the longevity of some of our homeless folks. So you see the slide in the top left, the image there. So out of the current 32 chronic homeless that we are on our list and we're accounted for right now, is what you'll see is, I mean, it kind of ranges all the way from 1 year to 26 years. And half of our 32 have been homeless for 5 years or under, and the other 16 have been homeless for 6 years or more. So, I mean, the goal still is trying to get to those folks that have been homeless 5 years or less, because they're still, you know, that chance that there's still a chance that they're going to get some help and that they want that help as it comes up. But as you get that 6 year mark and longer, you find that people this becomes their lifestyle. They're used to it. And it's a little bit harder to get them the help they need than willing to take it. The other slide is that 16 that we got help or no longer are being accounted for by us. You'll see again, I mean, majority of them are under the 5 year mark, with only a handful being over that 6 year or more mark. So again, it goes back to just that correlation of trying to say, hey, the sooner we can get to somebody, the sooner we can do our outreach with them, the better and the more likely we are to get them the resources they need. And the other slide right there, the top right corner, again, we find about 90% of our homeless have some type of mental health issue or dependency issue. And again, the mental health side of it plays a significant role in trying to maneuver through this community issue. I did want to highlight some success stories. I think oftentimes people ask, well, what happened to these folks? How did we, are we really accounting for them, or what is it we're doing? Is the process really working? Here's 3 success stories that we have right here. This gentleman, George N, was he's retired from the Army. He's bound to a wheelchair. He came into Auburn about a year ago, and between us and Health and Human Services, we were able to actually get him to the VA's hospital in Reno. We're not in contact with him anymore. So after these stories, we're not quite sure what happens with folks any longer. Denise C, she's an example of someone who, over 5 years now, has dependency issues, was in and out of jail, couldn't stay clean, couldn't stay sober, so she couldn't get into these shelters. Really, it came down to the story I got was the last time she was in jail prior to getting her into this, she realized that, hey, it's not the lifestyle I want anymore, and started working closely with Health and Human Services, and she gets into a shelter. For us, our tracking, it's been over a year since she's received the services, and we haven't had any more contact with her after that. Frank L, he, during the pandemic, got sick, lost his job. He was living in his car, and the officers worked with him to get him the help that he needed, get in contact with Health and Human Services, and they were actually able to pretty much get him into housing pretty quickly and get a job. So under a year, how quickly it is to get some of the services they need before all these other things take place. So that's just 3 of the success stories that we have here. So now I want to talk about kind of the city how the city's broken down. If you'll notice the map on the right side, that's a heat map right there. That's what we got with the new CAD RMS system. So just want to highlight the image there and the hotspots. So we talked about hotspot policing and looking for those areas that are more problematic and more what I call the top offender locations. And as you know, beat 1, it's north part of Auburn. It's not North Auburn, which is the county, but it's the Highway 49 corridor. And what you'll start noticing is that some of these hotspots for us, the Nevada train station is a location that we go to a lot. The parking lot's open and overnight parking there. The amphitheater, library, the county buildings are another hotspot, and then the Elmwood Motel. So we know during COVID, the Elmwood the county was in the thought process of purchasing the Elmwood for all this quarantine and the homeless issue. But as you can see, it was already one of our top hotspots, and that would have only led to even more calls for service in that location. So this is what we're seeing there in our beat 1. Beat 2, again, you'll start looking at some of the hotspots. The thing about beat 2 for us, our parks, the 3 parks are in there: Overlook, Railhead, and Recreation. You'll notice in the bottom left part of the map, kind of see a shaded green area there. That's one of our hotspots, the Brentwood, Auburn, Folsom area. One of those reasons it's a shaded area. It's wooded, it's concealed. The folks that can kind of only see what's going on there are certainly the residents that live in that area. And so it's hidden from us unless we're getting those phone calls from the community. And I know we get a number of calls from that area, and we're appreciative of it because, so again, some of that stuff is out of sight, out of mind for us. So again, we really rely on the community to let us know what's going on. Our parks, going back to our parks, a lot of that is folks who are living in their cars in the parks, and then also Old Town. It's one of the most visible areas. It's also a lot of traffic, a lot of foot traffic. It gives an opportunity for people to panhandle and ask for money. And so again, and even in Old Town, there's a number of places that really make it intriguing for folks to hide in these areas and kind of be in those places that are out of sight, out of mind. So our second objective was to reduce those nuisance type calls for service by 10% overall over the 3 years. And here you'll see that there's the 5 calls types: camping, loitering, panhandling, trespassing, and suspicious activity. Again, what we see is an overall decrease compared 19 to 20 numbers by 16%, which is down 151. Camping is down by 23%, which equates to about 25 calls for service there. As I note, some of this could be because we've been more proactive with our CAT team going to those highlighted areas I just showed you. Could be working with the fire department and the weed abatement, getting a lot of those areas cleaned up and maintained, both for fire fuel reasons, but also for the homeless transient reasons as well. Loitering is up, and so is the trespassing type calls. In some of the data, what we anticipate is maybe because of the issues that the county was having on the DeWitt Center and the increase of homeless and transients going up in that area. What we were seeing was the initial wave as people were getting off the railroad, train station, buses, making their way up here, coming to what they thought was Auburn, North Auburn, the county, and then making their way to DeWitt Center. So that's kind of what we really were kind of leaning towards, why we saw that increase in those two. Panhandling, again, I couldn't tell you why, other than maybe because we've talked about this, panhandling in itself is not the crime. Really, again, the courts have not come back with that decision, but we can't arrest or cite people for panhandling. It's not against the law to ask for money. We've talked about this again before. It was always deemed an opportunity for a time, place, or manner when to do that. Nobody wants to be asked for money when they're just walking away from the ATM or stuck at a gas station. So that's kind of where we are with that. And then suspicious activity as well. We saw a pretty significant decrease in that as we move forward. So here's a highlight some of our camps. So we've got 58 camp calls located throughout the city. Again, going through comparing 2019 data to 2020 data as we collect this, what we found is that this was a 50% increase to our camps compared to 2019. So we saw a pretty significant increase in camps. And then 33 of those camps were on private property, with a third of those on Union Pacific Railroad's properties. And I know the fire department's been working very closely with Union Pacific to continue that weed abatement and cleaning up. That's what we're finding out, as well as, again, as that's cleaned up, so are some of these camps. And then our cost. So that's the $5,381, the approximate cost of our CSO working on the camps, whether posting them or working with Recology, working with our Public Works Department. That's one of those kind of a hidden cost as we're dealing with some of this stuff. Our proactive efforts, another thing, we want to track what kind of how everything we were doing when it came to proactivity kind of aligned with what we saw with our homeless issue. And we use this address unknown designation. So if someone tells us they don't have an address, or then that's how we kind of on the back end with the data consider them to be homeless or transient. So you'll see there with traffic subject stops is the first bar, 253 subject stops over 2020. Little less than a third of those were, a little more than a third of those were homeless related. 13 citations were issued to folks who had no address, and 9 arrests. Our CAT team plays a significant increase in that. Their contacts are 224. Again, citations 28 and 8 arrests to those address unknowns. And what you'll find is both the subject stops, certainly the CAT side of it, most of those are the municipal code citations that were really geared towards camping, scavenging, alcohol-related issues, and what have you. And then you'll notice that our traffic stops, we had 1,437 traffic stops last year. None of those had an address unknown, and we issued 103 citations. So you see most of our work and our contacts with folks is going to be our CAT team and the work they do on subject stops. I wanted to highlight some of our problem-oriented policing success stories, certainly as it relates to our homeless plan. The statue in the park, we had the trash and graffiti. Public Works and the police department worked together to clean up the debris, clean up the graffiti. We also did some work with landscaping reduction and trimmed it back. Again, this does limit the folks from congregating in these areas. Herschel Young Park, we had an individual there, history of drugs, 290, but we were finally able to get him between CAT and Health and Human Services resources. And 290s are a tricky one because there's only a few shelters that they can go to in this region, and they have to stay clean, sober, but it's a 290 that it's a special shelter. The Bicentennial Bridge. So this is one where obviously a lot of folks, if they're using this bridge to go underneath it to get to the park, they found that we had homeless individuals, transients sleeping under the park, bathing in the water. We went under there, graffiti with Public Works, cleaned it all up, cleaned up the landscaping. And there's a portion of that area where everybody's going to kind of hide and sleep and stuff, is we're looking at fencing that area off to limit that from continuing. the goal with the problem-oriented policing projects is to come up with this short-term solution, but also a long-term solution that it doesn't require the same resources to go back to address. So we're looking at what it would look like to put up a fence in that location that wouldn't keep people from being able to use it as normal, but not camp there or sleep there any longer. Some of the challenges that we experienced, obviously COVID-19, everybody experienced this. But one of the things was our health and human services clinician and our resources there really shifted gear towards the project room key. So with their kind of all hands on deck for the things that they had going on, it slowed down our ability to get some of those resources. So our staff, CSO Johnson, really had to step up his game and make sure he started learning how these different processes work, what he needed to do and what the police department needed to do to get some of these folks the resources that they needed. Like I said, COVID-19, our numbers are significantly down. I'd love to say that's how they're going to stay. But there's a possibility that with COVID and with all the shutdowns, with a lot of these things that were taking place, we didn't see the same numbers of homeless and transients. Some folks may have gotten shelter elsewhere. So certainly 2021, when we get the numbers up at the end of this year, will be an interesting comparison. And then, like I highlighted, 4 of our chronic homeless, that's about 13% of our homeless, are 290s. And obviously we got one of them in a shelter. Hopefully they stay. But it's one of those things that's a tricky challenge for us having to deal with those folks. And then here's some additional pictures of what the team deals with on a regular basis. I would like to highlight that, with our model, as we move forward, we have another agency who's reached out and wants to replicate our model moving forward. So, I think that's pretty important to highlight the work that the staff and the team is doing out there. One of the other things that we have too, and we've had it, so one of the issues in 2018, 2019, when we kicked this off, was finding new ways to report the incidents, the camps, everything else. So in the beginning of 2019, when we kicked off our strategic plan, we implemented this part of the city already had this as part of their website. Other departments were already using it, but the police department added on there 4 different topics: crime tips, graffiti, narcotic tips, but also illegal camps. So someone can go to the website, city's website, do the report, a concern, tell us where the camp is. They can take pictures. It'll load up there for us, and it goes right here to city staff or PD staff, and as well as our city clerk, who keeps track of some of this stuff as well. So it's a good way of following up with it and making sure that we know about it without having to call, or people are concerned about having to call 911 or the non-emergency number or what have you. They can use this system, and I know there's some community members that do use it, and they do use it regularly. Again, I think you got to highlight the successes. And here's a statement from Health and Human Services, talks about some of these folks that we've been able to get help, and that things are going in a positive direction for them. Not every story is a success story. We have people who relapse and back up on the streets. But again, I think this highlights some of the work that is going on, and also what we have going on is working. Some of the questions, maybe what's next? As we move forward through 2021, I think as we continue on this, we continue to collect data. I hope people aren't worried that, hey, at the end of 2021, regardless of what our numbers are, somehow we're going to stop addressing the homeless transient issues within the city. This was a 3-year strategic plan to identify what issues we have, what are we faced with, and how do we take our resources that are available to us and then bring them back together to marry up and make sure we're having a success story. I think mental health will be our biggest challenge. As we move forward, there's different resources that we can tap into and work with to get those folks the help they need. But again, there's some of these things, they have no place to go. I can tell you from the drug and alcohol side of it, certainly COVID-19 impacted that significantly. But when these folks are using drugs and alcohol and whatnot, and they have no place to go to sober up, to detox in a controlled environment, we're only going to continue to perpetuate this issue out in the street. So again, that's one of those issues that we've got to continue to navigate moving forward. And that's the end of my report.
Chief, thank you so much for that report. Very comprehensive. I love the slides, as I mentioned before we started. Thank you. I'm going to start with a few questions, and I'll pass it on to my fellow council members. But the new RMS system is clearly helping us get a better handle on metrics, and I saw it in your presentation, so thank you for that. The couple of questions I had that I'd like to focus on is slide number 10. It was a situation that the whole council kind of engaged in, earlier, well, no, I guess it was middle of last year when we heard that there was a potential for the Elmwood to be purchased and converted. You mentioned that you had an increased number of calls to the Elmwood vicinity. The nature of those calls was just generally what? I mean, why is it such a hot green spot over the Elmwood Hotel there in that slide?
To answer that question, so the Elmwood is used by other entities to house parolees, probationers. So you already have that entity there, but you also have a gas station that sells alcohol across the street. You have some of those things are going on. You have over the freeway, you have another shopping center that it's a place where we know people panhandle. You have a grocery store there that they can get items. So it just becomes this kind of a hub, an area that they hang out. And that's where we get the calls. You also have a bar across the street that they will frequent. So it's just one of those types of areas that it does have folks congregating there.
And given the nature of the use, as I understand it, and I might be incorrect, but as I understand it, it was some of the dependent folks who were in the community who were testing positive for COVID were put into the Elmwood. And I appreciate the use, and we need to take care of everybody in our community, but the idea of converting that to an ultimate, long-term facility for whatever the resident might be, I think this information is very clear that it was a draw on your resources, right?
Yes, absolutely. We already respond to those calls as it is, and those numbers as they were. If we were going to increase that and have a number of folks going there, whether it's the homelessness and the issues out there. Remember, typically we only have one supervisor and an officer working the streets at any time of the day. And so that would have taken away our resources from the rest of the city.
Now, next slide, if you would flip over that, the Overlook Park. I kind of focused on the nature of that hotspot. Is that, so what constitutes that hotspot? Is it just the sheer number of calls for service? Is it folks reporting suspicious people? Is it the combination of all those things? Why is the Overlook Park kind of that hot green spot in this image?
A combination of everything, but the suspicious activity and some of the loitering side of it. But that's where, so this covers all those nuisance type calls. And that's what some of these areas are. So that's why you get the railhead, you get Overlook. You just get those suspicious cars that are in there, suspicious people that are there. And that's those calls that we get on. It's not, when it relates to the parks, that's common. I mean, we can get calls at night. People are there at night and they shouldn't be there.
And I know years ago, we've had conversations with ARD, who are a partner with the city, and talked about trying to get cameras out at the Overlook Park. It is, in your opinion, would cameras out there help alleviate some of this, or is it more just general concern, general nuisance calls? Folks are concerned about what they're saying and they're making the phone calls to the police department, which frankly is what we're asking people to do. We're saying, call the police department if you see something suspicious. And is that what we're seeing here, or are there measures that can be implemented at this ARD facility to kind of help with the number of calls and the amount of attention that APD has to put into this site?
Well, to answer the one question, I hope that part of this is people are calling us, right? I mean, that's what we've been encouraging since I got here was make sure you're calling us. We don't know what we don't know. So I hope that is part of it. But a lot of these are going to be those suspicious activity type things. We want to know what's going on. As people see, cars drive down that road late at night, they don't belong there. People call and let us know what's going on. The other question is about the cameras. The reality is I think the more cameras that we can put up in certain areas within the city are absolutely a benefit to us, the police department, to do our job, but also to make sure we see what's going on in these areas. It's almost like developing our own mini real-time crime center, taking these cameras that we have throughout the city and bringing them all together. And I think it's a bigger conversation to be had given all the cameras we currently have, and being able to tie those all together citywide and being able to use them in real time.
So that brings me to my next question on this particular location. We have our boxes around the city strategically placed in, and we have some very well documented successes with those cameras and license plate readers in capturing people who have committed crimes. Is this a location where a box like that might be beneficial for either ARD and the city to look at putting one of those boxes up?
We'd have to do more research to give you a really finite answer to that. But if anything else, it would deter people from being in there when they shouldn't be in there. And it would deter people from doing things they shouldn't be doing in the parking lot.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate that. The next slide, I had a question on, is slide 13. And I think here you mentioned something that surprised me a little bit, and that's that right-hand photo and box about total cost cleanup, total cost for cleanup. That seems really low to me. Are we just seeing far fewer well-established encampments that haven't developed the debris fields and waste fields that we have seen in years past that results in that lower cost?
So yes and no. Some of our camps that we found, that the 58, although they've been reported as camps, they've been described to me as kind of where people are just storing their property. So it's not a true camp the way you're seeing all that debris in that picture of the 5300. Some of it's just someone's personal property they're storing off the beaten path, and that'll come into us as a camp. Now, the camp calls, they're not all of them are well established. Some of them are, but a lot of this is just working with, it's again, Recology's cost plus our CSOs and the time that some of the officers are spending just on those camps. It's not our overall CAT costs. I actually didn't put that slide in here. We spent about $25,000 in 2020 as related to the CAT operations.
So the CAT operations, obviously, that's an important cost. It's a real cost for the city and the county and the team that comprises the CAT program. But the cleanup cost was what surprised me, because I recall in doing tours with Jennifer and your officers, some of the encampment cleanups had double, we're in the well into the $10,000-$15,000 range, as I recall. And I guess I looked at this and I thought, wow, if this is real, this is a significant improvement from what we've seen in years past. The cleanup that I think happened, and maybe what's going on, maybe it's a shared cost, because Recology, I know, donates a lot of energy and resources to help us deal with this issue. So it could be some of that. These are maybe just city costs, but the cost is something I'd love to know a little more about, because if we're really at that number.
In comparison to, just to answer, in comparison to 2019, we spent $5,805. So it's a little bit, it's about a little less than $500 decrease. So even their 2019 numbers, it wasn't that far off.
I guess maybe you and I can have a conversation offline, because I think we're talking about different things here. The costs for some of the large encampment cleanups, I thought well exceeded the $10,000 range, just in trash bins and equipment and getting all of that stuff safely out of the area and to where it needed to go. So I'll follow up with you, Chief, on that particular item. I do have one question, and I apologize. I probably should understand what this is, but the 2090 or 29, what is a 2090?
The 290, they're sex registrants.
I'm sorry, say that again?
A 290 is a sex registrant.
Oh, geez. Okay. That's why we need to take care of those folks and get them off our streets. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
We will go, I see Councilwoman Amara's hand up.
Thank you, Mayor Spokely. And thank you, Chief Canan. That what you're doing is really excellent. I am especially like to see, and I'm glad you added that this time, the stories of the success stories. I'm very impressed, because it is very difficult situation. And as you said, mental health is a big component, 290s. So I applaud you for the success stories. A couple little questions. One of them is, you said, so we have a total of about 33 homeless is the count, the latest count?
We're at 32 based on our data.
Okay. And have you been able to determine, are they Placer County or Auburn homegrown individuals? Are you able to determine that, or are they transplants from other areas? Have you been able to determine that?
That's interesting you asked that question, because we've asked a couple, and what we found is they've given us different answers every time we ask. They'll give us a different response. Like, yeah, I'm from Auburn. Well, no, I'm from somewhere else. So we are trying to navigate through that. What we found is most of them are locals, not necessarily maybe Auburn grown, but from the region. What we found too with our transit team, our bus drivers and whatnot, is during this year, they actually let us know that they were seeing an influx of Bay Area individuals coming through the train station, the bus station. Although they were taking a minute to pause here when they found out where the other resources were, which is up in the county area in North Auburn, they all pretty much went to the DeWitt Center. So we do see a new group come in, but most of that, what we found out, what has been reported, is kind of once they get here, they make their way up to the DeWitt Center, where, again, the resources are, where those issues, where they have those, they can get them. We don't necessarily have those resources.
Right. Yes. Okay. And then you had indicated, I'm not sure if, I don't know when you did this report, but you said a little bit that you've had some repercussions from the county. They have implemented the ordinance that kicked basically them off the government center. So very recently, have you seen more come in our area as a result of their ordinance?
You're referring to the no parking?
No, I'm referring to the no camp. They were all camped out. There's many that were camped out in front of the DeWitt on that lawn there.
So not that's been reported to me. I know there's places in the county area that have seen it, that's where the homeless seem to go to. We haven't seen really an influx as far as I'm aware of now. One of the things we are worried about, though, is as the ordinance goes into effect for the county, and that's that overnight parking.
Yes.
So certainly this year, what staff has already been working on is identifying those large parking lots or those areas where folks could park in their cars and in their RVs or whatever it is, and end up in a place where they shouldn't be. So we are mapping that out. We're coming up with our own plan to address that when it starts we anticipate will happen. So we're looking at how do we address that. So that's in progress right now.
Great. That was going to be what I would really encourage, because I do see there are individuals who I see parked around, and I'd like you to see you work with the county. I know they have indicated there's no place right now that they can legally park. That would be great. I'm glad you're working on that, and I'm glad we brought that up. And then as far as the 290s, where exactly, I mean, you said there is a special place. We don't have any place in this county because the city, the homeless shelter at DeWitt doesn't allow them.
Right, it's outside the county.
It's outside the county, okay. And so you direct them there?
If that's where they go, that's, again, we can't force somebody to take the services. We can't force them into a shelter. If that's where they choose to get into this, I know Health and Human Services works with them to get them into these different places.
Okay. And same with mental health. Where is there a place? Are they just mostly in different care homes that you are placing some of the individuals who will go, seek services for mental health or residents?
Yeah, so the Health and Human Services really takes the lead on those. Once we get them kind of married up with our Health and Human Services, with the clinicians that we work with, they really take the lead on them. I couldn't tell you exactly where they end up, where they go, how that services work out for them.
Okay. And so from my perspective, the two things that I'd like to see is a place where people can park, because I feel like, and I think you really emphasize the fact that people who are homeless for less than 5 years, there's an opportunity there. And so certainly there are many people, especially with COVID, who couldn't pay rent, and they are living in their cars more and more. So I think a place where people can park so we can help them, and they don't have to hide, is a good thing. And then also I think it's important that we also, if we can, I'd be very interested in our 32 to know what if any of them are, or how many are from Placer County. I'm assuming, do they know the local schools? Do they have any connections? That would be of interest to me.
Okay, I can follow up on that.
Thank you. But other than that, I think you're doing a wonderful job. And again, I really enjoyed the success stories, and the more the better. So thank you.
Thank you.
That's all I have. Thank you.
I have some questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, so actually, Daniel, you had your hand up first. Did you want to go?
Go ahead. I went first last time. I'm happy last this time. So go ahead.
Okay.
Rachel, I'm sorry. Go ahead with your questions.
Okay, sorry. I was just riffing in there in the middle.
Trying to sneak dinner in as we're having our meeting here. Sorry about that.
Okay. So I guess my question was, you've talked about trying to provide resources to different people. Are there any resources that you're finding just aren't available, that there's a gap that we really should be filling that's not there?
There's a lot of services here in Placer County. I know oftentimes they talk about the shelters being full and everything else, but there are other places that these folks can get to. From my perspective on it, we start talking about the issues, the mental health issues, and trying to get those folks the help they need so they're not self-medicating. But the reality is the services do exist. And, we found with our clinicians in the Health and Human Services that with all the services, it takes time for a lot of those folks to build that rapport, not only with us, but with the clinician. And so as those contacts become more frequent and they happen more often, they are able to develop those rapport. And, and like I wrote in the slide, it's like, you got to take advantage of those times when the folks when they're clean, they're sober, they're medicated correctly, and then saying, hey, here's the resources, right? And I think if we're there and, we're giving our information out enough, and our clinicians working and getting their information out enough, when it happens, they make that phone call, It's really about being right there. And I know previous years, kind of the discussion was getting our own part-time clinician here, working out of the PD part-time would be, again, a continued resource for us, because, what we found is, we can't become the experts of all things health and human services. That's why these clinicians are the experts in this. They know what services are out there. They know what the county provides. They know what other organizations will provide. Like I just learned of it, Advocates for Mental Health Housing. They exist right there off Atwood Drive in North Auburn. And so being able to tie in with those types of resources could help us moving forward. But again, it's having that expert here in-house. I'm a huge proponent of advocates and folks like that, because they are the experts in those areas. So I don't know if I answered the question, but it's kind of.
No, you did. You can't make people get help. So as long as there are those avenues there, and it's good to know that a part-time clinician might provide you as additional assistance for making those relationships. So that's good. So you talked a little bit about COVID and how it's been impacting things. Are you concerned that the fact that there's many people who are not being evicted who could be right now, and that there's going to be a wave of evictions that may happen at some point, and that will increase our homeless population?
I am, yes. I've seen the studies that are out there talking about all these folks who are behind on their rent as this goes. That very well could be a huge wave of it. I'm hoping that that group falls into kind of the first year of people who are, hey, if you give me a job, you give me some housing, I will go do what I need to do to get back off the streets to move in. So I think that will be the group, as long as there's services and as long as there's opportunities for them. I think that'll be an easier demographic to help.
Okay. My last question is, you talked a lot about using cutting down brush and landscaping as a way of trying to mitigate some issues. I had heard of the police in Sacramento working with SMUD to get some lighting recommendations, because lighting can also make things inhospitable for people spending the night and camping in certain locations. Have you worked at all with property owners or city locations to improve lighting to change kind of the feel in an area so it may not be a great place for people to hang out?
So we do, that's part of our CPTED plan, so the crime prevention through environmental design. So we have worked at the different locations. So oftentimes when we see a building plan come through, it's the lighting that we make recommendations about. That's one of those areas. Parking lots to business owners, Auburn Town Center is an example. We can make recommendations for those things. Even in the jury parking lot, we've talked about changing the lighting there to make it more well lit. For us, it's certainly an area where people visit. But yeah, so we're always looking for those opportunities as we come across. One of the things the officers do is a kind of a CPTED part of our planning process, which I mentioned, but also as a community service. So if a business owner or a resident has questions on, hey, what can I do? Then we'll make those recommendations. And also on our website is a brochure that talks about the CPTED concepts and those ideas.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I think we're moving on. Daniel, I see your hand up, but let's give Councilwoman Don Calvillo a chance to ask questions.
Okay, I'm next, or is that what you said, Matt?
Go ahead, Alice.
Okay, thank you. So thank you very much, Chief. Really appreciate the in-depth report and all the great work that you and the team are doing here. It's very impressive. I remember receiving this report last year I think I was just a citizen at that time, but very, very happy to see these reports. And I agree with Councilwoman Amara. It's nice to hear the success stories. So it's good to see that people are actually getting the services that they need. At least some of them are. So appreciate that very much. I too did have some concerns about the potential impacts to the county's no camping ordinance and how that will impact us going forward. Because I do expect that we'll probably see more RVs and perhaps even camping in cars our way. But it's hard to say, really, I guess. So looking forward to how we're going to be dealing with those issues as they come down the pipeline. I wondered how it was working with UP, because I know you had mentioned that there are several of these camps that are on the railroad properties. And so I know we work with them on the shaded field break efforts and so forth, but what kind of collaboration are you receiving with regard to the homeless encampments that are on their properties?
Yeah, the response back from PD staff is sometimes it's difficult to get them to be responsive to their area. It's not just with the camps themselves, but we have graffiti on some of their properties, their trestles and whatnot. Couldn't tell you how busy you are, but I'll just tell you some of it is just an unresponsive relationship from UP.
It seems like there are a number of issues that the city has with regards to railroad properties. And so it might be advantageous for us to set up a meeting with them. And I'll talk to John too about that, just to kind of go over this and fire hazard issues as well. Because now with their camps, the camps that are on those properties, Chief, are we just cleaning them up then for the most part? We're just taking care of it. We're doing it.
We are. We're just taking care of it. We don't want it to get worse. We don't want anything to get out of hand. And it's better for us just to do that work to make sure we keep track of what's going on.
And then the same then for the Auburn State Recreation Area. I know that there have been some camps there, next to Overlook Park, but more into the park itself. Are we just taking care of that cleanup too, and are we seeing an increase in camps there? I mean, I'm out there all the time, and on occasion I'll have someone stop me and say, "Oh, there's a campsite, underneath the bridge over here," or what have you. But are we seeing an increase there, or? Not
that I'm aware. Not that I could give you specifics right now. But yeah, I know we have things pop up, and that's the thing too. This is what got probably Boise in trouble, right? We talk about the Boise decision is what constitutes camping versus what constitutes someone just being there, laying in your sleeping bag or covered in a blanket is not camping based on that definition. And people can go do those things. It's what they can't do is establish a true camp. And I think that's what happens. We get those calls of, hey, someone's here, they're camping when they're not. They're just laying there in their sleeping bag. And this is what got the issue with Boise, is that they kept applying probably the wrong tool to the issue, because what we have to do is make sure it can't be targeting those folks a specific demographic. In this case, some of their sleeping bag is, typically it ends up being probably a homeless individual or transient. And if we treat everybody equal, that's what makes it fair and equitable, as long as we treat everybody the same. And so again, it's nothing wrong for someone to kind of hang out in some of these wooded areas unless they are trespassing. And this is where the community, business owners, property owners all play a significant role in how we take the next step for those things. But I know I kind of went on a different topic, but that's where we see these folks, we get the call, we get the suspicious activity call, someone's hanging out here, probably shouldn't be. And that's what we end up going to a lot of times.
And along those lines, I appreciated the slide that you had with regards to how folks can contact the police department. Yes, somewhere on, report a concern slide. So I would love to see, we have a presence on Facebook, and I would love to see you maybe do a post about this, Ryan, just to kind of get the word out again, how folks can report issues. I know that we've talked in the past, we had some kids that were hanging up over there behind Placer High School. They're not homeless, but that's a hot spot. And just, ensuring that folks know how they can report concerns, that they can do it online and they can do by phone as well. And it's important because then you can keep track, and that's really developing that log and those numbers. So I'd love to see maybe a little bit more outreach on that too. If we could just maybe post it a couple times, maybe on the website, that'd be great. I really appreciate it. I also agreed, the mayor had mentioned that the cleanup cost seems to be low. I'm not complaining, but it does seem like, just having dealt with cleanup, at the California Integrated Waste Management Board, with just garbage, it just seems like that's low. So I'm grateful for that. And I know that the mayor said that he was going to get with you to dive into those numbers a little bit more. I know that Recology is hauling that garbage. And so I don't know if that's part of our franchise agreement. I know they provide services to the city hall. So I don't know if we're able to incorporate some of that disposal under that.
It is part of the agreement. So they do all that trash and debris removal for us that they get no cost. So it could be years ago tied into that, and with those costs being incorporated, could reduce it. I don't know.
Yeah, that's probably what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking. I was thinking that it probably is tied into that. So because the costs do seem very low. But again, I don't want to complain about that, but and I think that was really the only questions that I had at this point. So thank you very much, Chief, and keep up the great work. I guess there was one. So this is a 3-year plan. We're looking to update it in 2021. Then at the beginning of 2022, is that kind of what is that the
correct?
plan?
So this 2021 is the 3rd year in this strategic plan.
Okay,
so we'll once we kind of get all the numbers, we'll crunch all the numbers, kind of see what worked, what didn't work, where we saw some pitfalls, what new resources are available out there, and be able to change gears if we need to.
Mm-hmm. Great. And again, it's great to see that we've already achieved our goals. So I know the team is working very hard. I know that Councilman Berlant has attended or participated in some of those excursions. I think that once COVID is done, I'd like to go out with you too, just to see what that's like. So keep up the great work, and thank you so very much. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. Amy, do we have any public comments on this item?
We didn't last time I checked. Let me just make sure we didn't receive anything during the meeting.
So can I ask a question though?
Yeah, you can, Daniel. I'm sorry. While Amy's looking.
That's all right.
I missed
No
it.
problem.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. I just have some follow-ups. A lot of good questions already asked. But Chief, you made the mention that the Elmwood Hotel obviously didn't become a project home key. It wasn't purchased. But when at all did the county stop using it under project room key? Because even though it wasn't purchased by the county throughout most of 2020, they were still using it for those that were not necessarily COVID positive, but those that were at risk for COVID. So just curious, do you know for sure that the county is no longer using it for project room key?
No, I'm sorry if I said I still believe they're using it. They just did not purchase it. So they're still using it for individuals to house their, same thing with probation and parole and whatnot. So it's still being used for those reasons. It just didn't become only for that purpose.
So in the definition that, well, let me take one step back. Thorough presentation. I think the data, the success stories really helps paint a really good picture. And as you and I briefly chatted before, I am obviously very cynical on this issue, as I've been for several years. And so I think this is an A+ work. Your team has done amazing, but there are some follow-up pieces that I think we still have room to grow. So back to the Elmwood though, in the way you explain the APD metric, which I like much better than the Marbert metric, a person though that is staying at the Elmwood, would they be considered homeless under your numbers? They
would be, based on our definition, because even though they're in the Elmwood Motel, we know they're not housed. They're not a true shelter. They're not, more than likely, they're probably not going to be there for very long. I mean, we saw a number of folks actually go into the Elmwood Motel and they didn't want to follow the rules. So they said, hey, I'm out of here. In theory, they would have been found no longer part of the chronic homeless because they were housed. Even for a day, they're housed and they would come off that study list. So our definition, no, we were not taking them folks off. We actually had that conversation about some of those individuals that end up, it's like, we know they're probably going to be homeless all over again. So that's kind of where we came into the more restricted definition for ourselves.
I appreciate that clarification, because obviously it's one thing to have a bed to sleep on, but then you're still causing the same issues. That's the reason why we called it the transient and homeless issue. Is it's not just people who don't have a place to sleep. It's those that are breaking and violating various laws.
Right.
Ted, you talked about the crime prevention through environmental design. Do you have a officer that is leading that effort? Because if I'm not mistaken, it was Lieutenant Pecoraro that was kind of the leader and had attended trainings. Has that been passed on to somebody else?
So one of our volunteers is the CEPTED training. Connor Johnson is our CSO. The goal is actually to get him to the next CEPTED course. There was a plan in place to get everybody into the training, and then COVID hit. So a lot of the training has been postponed. A lot of it's coming back now, but part of our succession planning was getting more people to the CEPTED training. But also it's, a lot of our folks understand the concepts of it, the lighting, the landscaping, those types of things.
Okay, appreciate that. I will note that at the Old Town Business Association meeting this month, there was a lot of discussion related to Herschel Young Park, and specifically the talk about the fact that they go there to plug in. And I know that, locking electrical outlets, for example, is a CEPTED item. However, it's a city park, and we give away free electricity there. Thus the reason probably why every morning you can drive by and they're sitting right there, because they're likely charging their phone. So just curious if that's going to pass on to either the CAT team to start looking at those things, or if we could use the opportunity to go and maybe do some updated presentations to the business districts. I know you did in maybe 2019 time period, but I think that it's time to maybe put those back on the schedule.
Yeah, we were very open to attending those meetings, and again, if anybody just calls or reached out to us, we'll get somebody to attend a meeting and talk about those different concepts. The CAT team in this case is our primary team. It's a part-time team that goes out there, but we certainly will attend a meeting and talk about the CEPTED stuff and laws and how really it governs on what we can do and what Health and Human Services and what role they play, as well as the community. We talk about misdemeanors and everything else. We need that community member, those business owners. They have to, for lack of better terms, want to be the victim to help us move these things through the process.
Great. You mentioned some of the impacts some of the other council members asked related to the pandemic. Curious though, I know that during the height of the pandemic or the beginning of it this past summer, officers really were reducing their contacts with the general public unless it was really a life safety issue, and there's a lot more reports being done by phone. Is there any possibility that the number of cases and some of your stats may be deflated because of the lack of public contacts made by officers during especially the beginning of the pandemic?
When you talk about the numbers, you talk about the calls coming into us?
Not necessarily the calls coming in, I guess that could be too, but I mean more an officer going and making contact with members of the public. I know that was reduced in the summer months, and there was a lot more reports by phone versus maybe driving around. I know the CAT team didn't spend a lot of time during the summer out and about making physical face-to-face contact. So just curious, again, the numbers are kind of up and down, it's kind of a mixed story, but just want to make sure in the numbers that are down, is that because of a lack of potential contact made by officers or by SOs because of the concerns of COVID?
I can tell you that's when we talk about challenges, that is one of those challenges for us, because we're not quite sure, yes, we got people help. Yes, we saw people no longer make our list over the course of 12 months. I would love to point to that, hey, they all got help. But to your point, I don't know why we saw such a significant drop certainly in our chronic homeless, because to get off our list, you got to no contact with us for the 4 different contacts over a 12-month period. And yes, CAT didn't go out there, but the officers are still out there. Our CAT team really is our patrol team, our patrol officers anyway. So if they recognize those folks or see them, there's a potential that they would contact them or at least note that they're there. But all that is the speculation on what information and why we saw, I think about 11 of those 16 kind of just fall off our radar.
A number of the council members asked about or brought up concerns about DeWitt. What collaboration's ongoing though with the county in anticipation for all those campers to be more or less evicted? Is there ongoing discussions with the county to come up with a consistent strategy?
So our CAT team, Connor and some of the officers have been reaching out to the county and trying to just have that discussion on what does this all look like? Because we're definitely in the early stages of this. I mean, like I've said, I anticipate what we'll see is that influx. So the goal is to get ahead of that and not be the place where they just park their RVs or park their cars and do that. Certainly where the areas that we don't want them in on private property, on some of these other places. So that's one of those areas that we're trying to get ahead of.
Okay. In the years past, we've talked about the potential of a park exclusion ordinance. Where are we with that potential concept?
We have one.
Okay.
How's
it working?
It appears to be a great deterrent. We have not issued a park exclusion ordinance citation, but what we have is when we tell the folks that, hey, if you do these things, we will give you the citation. You will not be allowed in the park. That seems to be a pretty good deterrent, as it's been reported to me.
But you haven't had to use it?
We have not.
Okay. With the strategic plan being a 3-year plan, has come in kind of, getting ready to see whatever you bring, for the future. Where do you see the ad hoc transient homeless task force and the members of the community and the business groups into the future? Obviously, that group, we haven't met since we kind of handed it off to you in 2019, or probably mid 2018. Where do you see that group, if any, in kind of how you move forward in the coming years?
That's a great question. I was actually just thinking about that the other day of, with the creation of the Chiefs Advisory Council, but I think it would be good to have a community meeting about this, have a discussion on did we see success? This is where we are. Now that we have a good snapshot of what our problems are, what our concerns are, I think it's easier to go into a mode where now we can start talking about how do we start solving these specific problems. Because we can look back to the aerial map of the city, saying, look, these are problem prolific areas. As a community, what can we do to better address? Could be like Mayor Spokely brought up, hey, we need cameras. Let's put cameras in certain of these areas so we can at least deter people from doing the things that we don't want them doing. Educating the business communities on the roles that they play in criminal enforcement, right? I mean, playing that role in being the victims, where we need them. So I think there's a lot of those things that we could take in the next step. Certainly don't have all the answers, and I'm definitely open to hearing from the community on what they think, what their input would be on, hey, how do we continue to address this?
And I think, your police chief's advisory committee obviously, makes a lot of sense to have these discussions, but obviously that was a very defined group and made up of, community members and business owners from the various districts, that it makes sense that we bring back some of this discussion with them to maybe check back in, report how we're doing. So I would definitely advocate that we have that conversation, and the mayor, myself being the council members on that, I guess we can have that conversation on whether or not we want to have a follow-up meeting with that group and with you, but just something to think about.
Sure.
You mentioned the Boise ruling, and I got a little confused by your answer. My understanding from the Boise ruling is that it's not that sleeping is allowed on public property. It's sleeping is allowed if there is no space available in a shelter. And so do you capture the number of times that we have called the shelter to try to get somebody in there and there is not room available, thus then allowing the Boise ruling to allow that person to sleep on public property?
Well, again, this is where I think Brian might pipe in, but the thing about the camping ordinance was they were using the camping ordinance wrong. Well, they weren't applying the right codes to the problem. They were using kind of the round peg to putting in a square hole, because what was happening was they weren't camping. So you can't enforce camping, but if someone's blocking the sidewalk, there's a specific law for blocking the sidewalk that should be applied correctly. If they're in our parks after hours, the parks are closed after hours, and therefore there is a ordinance that says they can't be there. the issue with is it had to be treating everybody the same. So it doesn't matter if you're homeless or any, you know, in a three-piece suit, you can't be in the park after hours. And so that's where the Boise decision, yes, you are correct. You can't cite somebody for camping if all the beds are full. But if they're breaking another municipal code, breaking another law, doing something else illegal, you apply the right section, apply the right law or municipal code to the problem. And this is where educating the folks on trespassing and everything else. So the Boise decision is what created, yes, there was some concern in a lot of that stuff, but if you apply things correctly, then you don't have the same issue that Boise created for us. And Ryan can add to anything if I missed something or misspoke.
Well, that provides the clarification that I was looking for, because I took away from your comments earlier a little bit different, especially the specific references to state parks, because even though it's public property, the Public Resources Code specifically says that you can only camp in a designated campsite. So I cannot go onto state parks land and just camp.
Right.
I have to have a permit, it has to be in designated space. So somebody is homeless, I would assume that follows the same, but I get you're not using a camping ordinance, you're using some other ordinance that to ensure that people are following the rules equally is what you're saying. That again, I think that helps clarify that. But my other point, and I know the mayor was trying to add in about the DeWitt being at capacity, but I'm just curious, are we capturing any times where we have tried to provide a bed for somebody and the shelter has said to our officers, no, we don't have room, so that we at least have an idea of what the magnitude is for our homeless, where we are not able to give them a place to sleep in the shelter?
So that's a good question. That I don't have the answer to that. The assumption is that they are in conversation with Health and Human Services when they're having these, when they're out there contacting, so they would know if there's beds available. So I don't have that data.
Well, I think based on the fact that we haven't issued any of these citations, right? Didn't you mention that, Ryan? That probably means that we've never investigated this. I mean, we've never issued a citation for somebody trying to camp at one of our parks, right?
Right. That, I mean, I don't believe we have a citation for someone camping. Otherwise, we would have issued, at least on our parks. Otherwise, we would issue a park exclusion ordinance as well. But yeah, that's some data I don't have as far as knowing when. The assumption is on our part of the shelters are typically always full based on the data that we get, and we know there's a waiting list to get in there. But I couldn't tell you if every time we contacted one of these 32, it's like, hey, you know, you're getting ready to put your head down the sidewalk here. Before you do that, let's check in with the shelter to find out if there's a bed available to you. That I don't have that answer.
Well, I guess my final piece here is I think that's the missing step here that we need to address in 2021 is how do we either capture that, or how are we ensuring that we're not just saying, okay, you've got to sleep, which is a legal right, but we're ensuring that we are trying to get them to the shelter. Whether they want it or not, we're at least trying to get them in the shelter. And I guess the reason why capturing that number is so important is so that we have an idea of how bad is the at capacity of the shelter. What effect is it really having on us as a city? Because then we have some better conversations with the county. And again, I preface this with the amount of data we're collecting, as was mentioned with the new RIM system, is off the charts, right? You know, we had just guesstimates before, now we have real data. I think this is just one final piece to really ensure that we are doing everything we can to not just enforce our ordinance, but more specifically to the first point you brought up in your presentation, which is give people places to sleep, places to stay, get them off of the streets. And so I definitely would look forward to figuring out, diving into that issue a little bit more. And I too would like to see the cost piece a little bit more, as the mayor and councilwoman down in Calvillo brought up. I think that that's an important discussion, especially as we get into budget development, because you brought up the clinician piece. You asked for that, I think, in 2019 budget year. And obviously we didn't have the money then. I don't know, we'll have it now. It's a priority, obviously, discussion. But I think that it's important for us to start having these conversations of what are the real costs that are additional to the department. What is it that you need from us? Maybe we can't afford it, but let's get back to what do we need to really continue to solve this issue. So I look forward to seeing more broken down about the costs of this effort and what can be done into the future. But again, Chief, I just wrap it up with your team, yourself. We really have come a long ways from 2018 and all the excuses that we had and were given. We're much more data driven, still more work to be done as we've talked about, but man, you guys are really, despite the challenges of COVID and the pandemic, doing a good job. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry to butt in at the last minute, but obviously, I'm very passionate about this issue in particular. So want to make sure that we are keeping our community informed of all the nuances. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Appreciate that. Chief Canan, thank you very much for your report. Well done. We're going to go ahead and take a 5-minute break and then come back and hear item number 8, which is the fire department.
Mr. Mayor, sorry. Before we do, we're getting past 3 hours. I was wondering if it would be possible to make a motion to postpone the fire chief's presentation. It's really important and I want to make sure that we give it the time and attention that it deserves. And so I wanted to see if it would be possible to make a motion to move it, since it doesn't seem like it's time sensitive, to the next meeting. So that way we aren't on here past 10 p.m.
As a guy who was on a planning commission meeting until 1 a.m. on Thursday of last week, I'll certainly entertain the idea of continuing this. We were going to, and there's been text flying back and forth with both the fire chief, myself, and the city manager. I'm open to entertaining this request. I don't have any problem with it, but I don't know how many people from the public are tuned in tonight to hear this year-end report from the chief. I'll open it up to the rest of the council. Who would like to either hear this item and maybe abbreviate our following commission and committee reports, or who would like to hear this tonight? I'm going to go around the horn. Daniel, what would you like to do?
I think your point was very valid. I was trying to see how many people are watching on YouTube right now. I completely agree that while we've had long night meetings, I definitely have a lot of questions as well as many others, and I don't want to have us be rushed, and I don't think it's time sensitive. So I definitely am in favor of, if the chief is good with it, I guess that's to the other piece. I'm good with us deferring it to the next meeting.
I think in our conversations via text, trying to figure out if we're going to continue or not, I think the chief was okay with it. There's a thumbs up. Sandy, any particular?
I'm in agreement. I'm very tired, and I'm sure everybody is, and everybody watching, and I would get a lot more out of it at the next meeting. And there's no motion that needs to be made. It's informative, and so I would get a lot more out of it at the next meeting. So yes, I agree with Rachel.
Fair enough. Alice, any particular concerns?
I'm fine with that too, Mr. Mayor. I've been on Zoom since 4 p.m. straight, so I'm all right with that. But I still, if you would please allot a break, just please, even if we do defer.
Biological break, understood.
I need a break.
So, Chief, sorry about that.
I think we have a procedural thing we have to do, right?
Yeah.
Mayor Spokley, I think before we move on off of item 7, I believe the city clerk mentioned there was public comment.
Sorry, Amy.
I don't have public comment for that.
I misheard.
No problem.
Thanks for keeping us in line there, Ryan. I appreciate that. All right, so I think we have a consensus of the council. Let's go ahead and push item number 8 to our next meeting. Anybody who is tuned in for item number 8, we apologize. The night is running a little long. We'll be refreshed and ready to hit this item at our next council meeting on March 8th. Thank you very much. Let's take a quick 5-minute break for just quickly. We'll come back and re-adjourn at 9:10 and wrap this meeting up. Thank you. Let's see, Rachel has the helper.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay, go to bed. Good night.
Hello.
Night.
Dave, did you see my questions that I shot you on your item?
I'm sorry. I was talking to Chief Canan. What was your question?
What are these guys doing? Did you
Yeah.
see those couple of questions I shot over to you?
I did, and
Okay,
happy to answer
perfect.
those questions.
We can chat about them during your item next meeting.
Absolutely. So
Fantastic. We'll give Alice another moment here to rejoin us. Daniel might have some fatherly duties to take care of, but
I literally just told my wife, listen, if you need me to rock him right now so you can do the things you need to do, I'll do that. If any of you watched the mayor of Lincoln, she was raising 3 little boys and is always on Zoom for work and city council meetings, and she's got hers in the background all the time. So there's Rachel's son, and just the world we all live in, whether it's cats or babies or children or dogs or whatever.
The airport group really knows my daughter really well.
that's awesome. All right, we're all back. Let's kind of wrap this up. We're going to do a quick city manager's report and COVID update, and then I'm going to go ahead and forego the city council committee reports until our following meeting. So I'll turn this over to our city manager, Mr. John Dunleavy, please.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, really quick. Just real quick, some of the notes from last week's electeds briefing on COVID. Cases are way down over the past couple of weeks. The case rate is just above 10, which still keeps us in the purple. To get below purple, we need to get below 7 to be in the red tier. Hospitalizations in Placer County are way down. There are less than 40 people, and they're reporting that over 90,000 plus people have been vaccinated in Placer County. So overall, some good things. I will tell the council that today we put together a proclamation, and I signed it under my authority. One of the things that we've been talking with the downtown associations is the idea of coming up with the parameters for them to put some of the things that they wanted to do as far as outdoor dining, some of the new outdoor seating, the shelters, and by signing the proclamation, we've got a new revised packet for the businesses to be able to do some things. Those will be coming back to the council on March 8th, just as to verify those things. But in order to move things forward for both of the business associations and for the chamber, I did that. One of the big issues that came up, I know the council's aware of it, is the issue of trash cans and the accumulation, both downtown and Old Town. We held a meeting last week, myself, Christine from Old Town Association, April from the Downtown Association, also Lisa, one of the business owners with Local Heroes in the yogurt shop. We talked about trash. We're going to be getting some information out to some of the businesses for them maybe to have some additional trash containers. The reality is that during the week, we're doing pretty good. On the weekend, when things peak, like on a Saturday, the trash cans just get filled up because the businesses are all using to-go containers. So like I mentioned last week, we were kind of talking trash, and we're going to be getting more information out to everybody. And then finally, staff's been working with both the Old Town and the downtown folks about outdoor dining configurations. We are getting some quotes on being able to put removable bollards out into the street so that as we move forward with outdoor seating and more of kind of a festival outdoor type of thing, that we have the quotes to go and do that. So with that, that's my overview, and I'll take any questions. And I see Jackie and April are on this also. So I'll take any questions.
So I think I saw Rachel's hand go up first. Rachel?
I just had I'm not sure if you're the person or somebody else. I know that a lot of the vaccines have been delayed because of the weather. Has there been any update on vaccines from the county that anyone knows about?
No, I'll just tell you that last week's report, the health officer, Dr. Oldham, they're just coming in slow. No, they're getting probably a max of 7,000 vaccines coming in. Now realize that right now it's difficult because they'll get, let's say that they get 7,000. Well, 5,000 of them are going to go to second vaccinations for people. So that means only 2,000 new vaccines are coming in. So it's just definitely slow, very frustrating because they are ramped up. They have the capability to do more, but on average, they're averaging somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 vaccinations a week only.
They did send out a text message last week that said they were delayed because of weather. So that's also impacting them too, that wherever they're coming from, they're having a hard time getting.
It absolutely is affecting them. And I think that the other thing that's important to realize is the numbers that the county gets as far as how many vaccines or doses hit the county don't include the doses that are going directly to the healthcare professionals, the Sutters and the Kaisers. So there certainly is most likely more doses that are actually getting into the county, but we only know what the state reports to us, and that's what the county health official tells us. So it's a little frustrating. We're getting kind of partial information. Councilman Berlin, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to clarify, John, you had said that there were 90,000 people who'd been vaccinated. I'm assuming that's 90,000 shots, so that would be first and second, and not actually 90,000 people. But I just want to clarify that.
Yeah, no, the number that he gave out was 90,000 plus vaccinations to date. So I think you're probably right.
Combination.
That it's some of them.
The next question I have, and I don't know if either of you have heard the conversation, but in the state tracking vaccinations, is the state reporting numbers back to the county as far as residency? Because especially with the earlier tiers, myself included, that are done by occupation, is through the county where you work, not the county you live. And so if we're really going to use a comparison of, our 400,000 population, are they calculating those that are either from other counties that are getting it or residents that are getting it in other counties, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, they didn't report that in the briefing. But
I'm curious if
obviously
at some point here, if that's a question you guys can bring forward to them, because just, we know how many people there are, and that seems to be a metrics they use a lot, but again, not everybody is a county resident getting it, and not everybody that's a resident is getting them through Placer County. So if we're going to start tracking it, that might help. So thank you very much for the clarifications.
Any other questions for the city manager? Alice?
It's not really a question. I just wanted to make a really brief comment. I did send a text to the council with regards to the federal relief package. We did hear a little bit about that today from our finance director in his budget update. I think it's $1.3 trillion package includes funds that would go directly to municipalities. There's actually $350 billion for state and local government throughout the entire country. And at this point, they would be using a formula for the augmentation, or actually for the distribution of funds, is based on population. And for cities or other municipalities that are under 50,000, they would be utilizing the CBDG distribution method. Not that those monies would be used for CBDG purposes, simply using that mechanism. If you're a city or a municipality that's more than 50,000, then you actually get a check cut to you directly from the United States Treasury. So what I'm hearing, I participated on a briefing with Cal Cities that there would be a pretty simple form that you would fill out saying you're interested in those funds. Right now, the city is based on their distribution schedule, we would receive up to $2.6 million of fund from monies from that relief package. And they could be utilized to replace lost revenue, and also to utilize for any spending that we've done with regards to COVID. And you could even designate some of those funds to nonprofits for COVID related expenses. So very interesting on that point. I just heard that the budget committee passed the package, and the floor is expected to take the vote up on Friday or Saturday. And then of course it will need to go over to the Senate. So I'll continue to keep you updated on that, but there is a possibility that we could get up to $2.6 million if the package were to pass.
Thank you very much for that update, Alice. Not seeing any other hands up. I'm going to go ahead and jump down to, let's see, we'll go to April. Do you have an update for us on Downtown Business Association?
She fell asleep.
She couldn't hang on.
No.
No.
No, just waiting for the, I'm glad to hear the package is going to be ready for the shelters, because I want to pass that all around and have it be intact and get that going right away. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, April. All right. We'll move on to Jackie.
I will keep this short and sweet since Mayor Stokely and I have a 7 a.m. date tomorrow morning at Medler's. I just want to update everyone on all we're doing with the grant. I currently have 11 restaurants that are that have applied for the Food Jets reimbursement, and one of them was a new restaurant to Food Jets, so they gained an extra restaurant on there. So far, we've cut over $3,000 in checks for the Food Jets reimbursement. We cut a check for $3,000 to the State Theater. Currently have over 30 applications in for the personal services grant. That's the hair salons, nail salons, yoga, gyms, and such. I have 11 applications in for the technology side, the website design, social media, such like that. And I have 20 others that I've sent the application in to, and I haven't received back, so I expect those any day. Tomorrow I have a meeting with a couple of Forest Hill businesses, which I'm kind of excited about, because Forest Hill has been a little hard to get a hold of. So being able to reach out to those businesses really helps, since our grant is for them as well. I have 33 heaters that are out in restaurants, and I have 15 left, waiting to hear back from a couple people to see how many they need. There were quite a few restaurants in Old Town that wanted heaters, but due to fire hazards, we were unable to give them to them. So I'm glad that I had the fire department check before we gave out the heaters, because it makes me feel a little bit better about not causing a fire hazard. As far as structures go, Monkey Cat is waiting to hear from their contractor about leveling out the parking space. And as soon as they are, they're ready to go with a structure. El Agave, we've measured for the structure. And then Wings, Brewmaster, Maker's Mountain, Sierra Smokehouse, and Baked and Brewed, I'm all visiting with this week to figure out what size structures we can fit for them. I think the biggest thing that we're really excited about is the rebranding and rebuilding of the Think Auburn First committee, which will be chaired by our very own Councilman Berlant as soon as he sets a meeting. But we have a website being developed currently for Think Auburn First, which will be a business directory. It'll house the Think Auburn First or Shop Auburn live videos. and potentially the new Dine Auburn Live videos that we'll be doing as well. So we're really excited about that and reestablishing Think Auburn First, because it really is an asset to our community to get people to think about shopping local. That's really all I've got, unless anybody's got any questions.
That's fantastic, Jackie. Thank you very much. A couple of the restaurants I've talked with the owners, and you've been right on it. So thank you for all your hard work in getting these grant dollars out into our business community. Very much appreciated.
And Sandy, I did get some heaters to your guys out there. Unfortunately, we can't fit a structure where they want it though. So we're not going to be able to do that. But we did get they're the one new restaurant to be added to Food Jets.
Oh,
so
great.
Exciting.
Thank you. I know they'll be happy.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. All right. Any other questions for April and or Jackie? Alice, go ahead.
Just a really quick question. So thanks for all the great work, Jackie. You're clearly hustling and really appreciate that. I've heard from some businesses that have gotten the heaters and so forth. So thank you so very much. And April also on the call. You said that there were a couple of restaurants where the heaters were a fire hazard. Was it because of the structure where they would be placed, or?
So it was the structure, the closeness to the building that they wanted to put them at. And then two of the businesses already had too many heaters and wanted to add more. And one of those had permanent heaters attached to the roof. So there was no way to add more heaters to those locations.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for April or Jackie? Guys, thanks for hanging on so long. Sorry this meeting ran so late. Hearing nothing more from the council. I don't see any hands going up. I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thanks, everybody. Sorry we ran a little long tonight. Good meeting. Lots of great information here. Brian, thanks for your help. And we'll see everybody in early March.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Good night. See you tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock.
Or 7 o'clock.